don't have a quorum yet, so if hopefully one of the other commissioners will show up in the next few minutes. Thank you for your patience.
Should be here in 5 minutes.
Everyone is ready? No, there's no update from Commissioner Davendell?
He confirmed he's not able to attend tonight.
Okay. All right. Call the meeting to order. Roll call?
Commissioner Barnes,
My apologies for being late. For some reason, I had this at 7:30. But I am here.
Commissioner Chomsky,
Present.
Commissioner Van Nydegen, and Chair Van Vigil McClanahan.
Present. All right. Now I will read the land acknowledgement with my microphone on this time. The City of Albany recognizes that we occupy the land originally protected by the Confederated Villages of Lishan. We acknowledge the genocide that took place on these lands and must make strides to repay the moral debt that is owed to this indigenous people, especially specifically the Ohlone tribe. We thank them for their contributions, which have transformed our community and will continue to bring forth growth and unity. The City of Albany commits to sustaining ongoing relationships with the tribe and together build a better future for all that now make this their home. All right. On to point 2. Is there any public comment that is not pertinent to the agenda items in section 5? Okay. I could.
That is an agenda item, yes.
Yeah, the discussion items are the red curb at Terrace Street, the sidewalk repair program report, and Kains and Bikeway evaluation. Okay, so no one, I guess we can check online.
Seeing no hands raised online, use the online raise hand feature if you want to speak on something not on the agenda. Seeing no hands raised.
All right, then let's go on to section 3.
One second. Presenting for the month of March. Police collision data, hold on. There were 0 pedestrian-involved collisions reported. There was 1 bicycle-involved collision. Hold on, let me pull up my notes for a second. There were 13 vehicle collisions reported, 4 of which were reported as injury collisions. There were 71 moving citations issued, and 2 DUI arrests were made. That concludes the report on police data.
Okay. Section 4, the approval of the minutes from last.
Can I ask a question about the
Go ahead.
police data? It seems like the number of citations, moving citations, was much higher than it's been for the last few years. Is there any reason we can point to that change?
The police department reported that they have been able to provide more staffing for enforcement over the last month, and staffing resources permitted will intend to continue to be able to do that.
Great, thanks.
Any other question? All right. Okay, so there's nothing else on in section 4, but the approval of the minutes. Do we have a
I'll move to approve the minutes.
Second.
Any discussion on consent calendar? Seeing no hands raised online, I'll do roll call.
Yeah.
Commissioner Barnes,
Yes.
Commissioner Chomsky,
Yes.
Commissioner Von Neidingen,
Yes.
Chair V. Hill McClanahan.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay. So now we move on to 5.1. Is there any presentation or, oh, okay.
Do you have a brief staff presentation on this item? So the item tonight is proposed parking restrictions at the corner of Terrace and Tevlin. The request comes from Waste Management, which has communicated that vehicles have difficulty making the southbound right turn onto Terrace when vehicles park along the northern curb near the intersection and have requested restricting vehicle parking. Access to Tevlin and Terrace is off of Nielsen. Houses on the east side of Tevlin face Peralta, and the street ends at a cul-de-sac north of Albany Terrace. South of Terrace Street, between houses facing Nielsen, Peralta, and Francis, is Jules Terrace Park, which is outlined in the purple on the lower end of the picture here. This is the main access to Terrace Park and the only curbside access, with a second path providing access to the park off of Francis to the south. The street widths, the memo mistakenly mentioned 25 feet on Terrace. It's actually 30 feet. Nielsen to the west and Albany Terrace to the north are 25 and 24 feet wide, respectively. And Tevlin is 20 feet with parking permitted just on one side of the street. There's only a pedestrian path of travel on the west side of Tevlin. There's no additional right-of-way beyond the roadway on the east side. And again, on-street parking is only on the west side of the street. Existing curb markings along Tevlin include approximately 30 feet of red on the southbound approach to Terrace and along the curb line on the east side of the street. An accessible parking space is striped on the south side of Terrace, placed near a ramp to access the park. That's at the lower right corner there, and between two street trees along the sidewalk along Terrace Park to facilitate vehicle loading. The other context for this item is the city's intersection red curb policy and the recently amended California Vehicle Code requirements for intersection daylighting, referred to as AB 413. This is a safety measure to increase visibility at intersections. The vehicle code now restricts vehicle parking within 20 feet of an intersection on the vehicle approach side, and the city's policy still applies on the departure side, which is for 10 feet of red curb, with the ability to reduce that down to a 3-foot minimum if it preserved a parking space. The curb length between the first driveway on Terrace Street and the curb is approximately 30 feet. A standard 10-foot red per the policy would leave 20 feet for one vehicle parking space, and that would place it further away from the intersection before the adjacent driveway. Reducing that toward the 3-foot minimum in the city's policy would provide a substandard length vehicle parking space, which would likely lead to second vehicles continuing to park in the space beyond the red and continuing to obstruct the intersection. So for that reason, staff is recommending that the city implement the standard daylighting policy, length of 10 feet on the departure side, and reduce the approach side, which currently is striped at 30 feet, but doesn't appear to really enable vehicle maneuvering any more so than reducing it to 20 feet would. And start there, where essentially implementing the intersection daylighting here, and then if waste management vehicles continue to have difficulty maneuvering this, we would evaluate for day of week restrictions, essentially restricting additional parking length to facilitate waste management vehicles on service day. So that's the staff recommendation, to implement 20 feet on the approach, 10 feet on the departure. And with that, I'll open it up for questions.
A couple of questions. Can you put the last slide back up just so everyone can see context? One question is there any historical knowledge of why the 30-foot red curb existed in the past?
I don't know the history.
Any of us have been involved in city government long enough to remember that. So on the section of Tevlin, the slide cuts off a little bit, but do you know where the driveway lies at the very north end at the top edge of the slide? It's approximately right where the top edge of the slide is?
I believe, did I have it in the memo? Yeah, I believe it's about 30 feet. Let me pull up the memo, because I think I did measure that length. Hold on. Are there other questions while I'm looking for that?
I guess one question is, has any city staff conferred with Waste Management about the proposed solution tonight?
We have communicated to them what we were considering as our recommendation, and they were comfortable with starting there and seeing how it worked.
Okay. Are there other commission questions? Back to that.
Well, actually, I have a quick question. What experience does the city have with one-day restricted parking? For example, they just slurry sealed my street, and there was plenty of warning to people to remove their cars. One person didn't, and so they had to go around it. And then we all have this issue on street sweeping days as well. So I'm a little skeptical of a possibility of consistency if we just put in a "don't park here 1 day a week" sign.
There have been issues at other places that have done just day of week. There was one that came before the commission, I believe on Gateview, where it was 1 day a week and there were compliance issues, and we had fire department access concerns that also weighed in on switching from day of week to red curbing a stretch.
The fire department in this case has not indicated any problems.
In this case, they didn't indicate they had access issues here.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe I can rephrase my question into one that's easier to
Well,
answer.
I have found it in the memos. There's approximately 25 feet of curb between the end of the current red zone and that first driveway. So it's about 55 feet from corner to the first driveway altogether.
And how many feet is a typical parking space?
Depends on the vehicle. When we're striping spaces, we generally are trying to stripe 20 feet. Vehicles are often 16, 17 feet, depends on length of vehicle.
So there's currently 25 feet of parkable space, which would be just a little over one standard parking space. And with the addition of the 10 feet that's in the proposal, bring it to 35, which is a little bit under 2 standard parking spaces.
It would be, yeah, there are more 2-car combinations that would fit in 35 feet for sure than the 30 feet around the corner, but there are definitely vehicles that would not fit together as 2 vehicles in that space.
All right, thanks. That's it for my question.
All right, and now it's time for public comment.
Anyone?
We have,
My name is Craig Hendrickson. I live right across. Actually, my house was in the middle of your thing there. My comment is a little bit to what Mr. Barnes said. I would prefer to have a time zone in front of the park. I don't know if you're aware of the amount of people that come to the park on any given weekend. This last 2 weekends, we had parties of over 100 people. So all the spaces in the neighborhood disappear and people are parking all over the place. And so I would request that you consider a time zone versus a painted zone to preserve parking in the neighborhood and allow the residents who've lived there all this time to be able to park in front of their houses, particularly mine. We were the one with red around one side, and now we're gonna have red on the next side. It seems to me a little bit too much. So we prefer that. And then maybe you could comment at some point on the tree cutback. The neighbors cut the trees back. There was quite a large overhang, and it would seem that gives the trucks quite a bit more room to turn. Yeah. So anyway, I request not to paint it red, and see if we could do a time zone instead. Did you want to add?
Good evening, Commissioners. Thank you for letting us speak here. I am Lori Hendrickson. I am the resident of 1513 Terrace Street. I did send an email of what our points were of why we are against painting the curb red. The additional phase, it not just strips our parking, but our elderly neighbors that live on the street. And for the past 20 years, the waste management has not had a problem coming through. The only recent problem was a 6-foot overhanging bush of our neighbor, which they obliged and cut it back all the way back. So I videotaped, actually I sent a Google slide to you all and commissioners, the truck easily making the turn. In fact, what has happened when the cars are not there is we leave for work and people pull in to park, or on the day that I was sick, I observed the truck easily making the turn, but hugging the curb in front of our house and ripping off branches of the trees in front of our house. So the other problem is with the waste management drivers is lately they're on their phone. I've observed them, I've videotaped them as they turn the curb, they're speeding and they're on the phone. So I think the problem is not to paint the curb red. And in my presentation, I'll give you copies of it. I'll show you the numerous amounts of visitors to the park that disobey that, park in the red for hours without any repercussions against parking the red. So I am in favor of a time-limited parking sign that says something like Mondays, please no parking on this curb, no parking, like the street cleaning signs, like Commissioner Barnes suggested. I think that is more reasonable than stripping the neighborhood of 2 parking spaces 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Wendy Remington, and I live at the Question driveway over on Tevlin Street. Parking in the neighborhood on weekends is unbearably difficult, and losing any parking on the street is really hard. If I try to go grocery shopping on a weekend, I work during the week, so if I try to go grocery shopping on the weekend, there's no way I'm unloading them in front of my house. So losing parking spaces in the neighborhood is really difficult, and often people even with parked red curbs, they regularly park in that red spot on Tevlin, like every single day in the afternoons. And I just wanted to add, would it add the thought that would it be possible to now, with the bush cut back, reevaluate the situation, see if that does the trick before we consider painting the curbs?
We have one hand raised online.
Okay.
Go ahead, Linda.
Sorry, I can't unmute. I agree. I have not, with the cutback, I have not seen a problem for the waste management to come through. And it's generally the parking that is obstructing. And I also, when I go out, cannot get back into my own parking because of the parking. So that I think a sign for the waste management makes much more sense than restricting parking for the residents. Thank you.
Excuse me.
No more speakers online.
All right. I'd just also like to note that there was one email in roughly along the same lines from someone who's not here. So, okay. So, commissioner discussion.
First, I need a clarification. This conversation has morphed into a general parking problem, not an issue with waste management. And I just want to make sure that we legally stick to the agenda item and not veer off, because we're required under the Brown Act just to agendize anything we vote on. So what's your advice on this? I know the city attorney is not here, but it seems like we're pretty constrained as to what we can vote on tonight.
I would not take action beyond discussing curb management at the corner, but you're more than welcome to consider the broader parking as it informs the noticed action.
To put it another way, we can talk about issues of parking in the neighborhood, but we shouldn't take action, consider taking action, go beyond particular pieces of curb that are mentioned in the agenda. Okay.
Can we have more information on what waste management's concern is? If it's not been a problem for 20 years, what changed? I'm just curious.
They have relayed that they've had numerous issues at this corner of trying to turn this corner and then not being able to exit when cars are parked on both sides of the street there. But I don't have more details than that.
Have you conversed with Waste Management since the bushes were trimmed recently?
We discussed that was what the residents brought up as a contributing issue. They relayed that their drivers did not think that was affecting their movement. So they communicated to us that they still had concerns separate from that.
The conversation, I guess I'm trying to figure out if their drivers experienced the new situation with the bushes trimmed back and said that even with the bushes trimmed back, it was still a problem, or if they were speaking hypothetically and said trimming the bushes back wouldn't solve this problem.
If you have particular questions you want relayed to them, I could do that, but I don't have.
Yeah, but the
more.
conversation you had with them was after the bushes were trimmed?
We discussed the feedback that the bushes were, what residents were saying were really impacting the turning movements, and that those had been cut back, yes.
Okay, but that conversation might have happened before the bushes were actually trimmed. That's what I'm trying to figure out, is when was the timing of this?
So my conversation with the route supervisor was after the bushes were trimmed, but I can't speak to
Okay, that's
how he communicated with his drivers.
clarification, thanks.
So our city codes basically say that we would red curb this intersection on the trailing edge between 3 and 10 feet.
That's
Standard
correct.
policy. So we're not really going out of bounds of our standard policy here.
That is the staff recommendation, to essentially implement the daylighting, the intersection red curb policy, and see if that is sufficient to resolve the issue before we go beyond that.
So just to clarify, not doing anything to this curb is not really an option. There's going to be some degree
Are
of.
we constrained by AB 413 to do this eventually anyway?
The state rules are on the approach side, so they don't impact the departure from the turn. That's where the city policy kicks in.
Okay.
3 to 10 feet.
That's correct.
The question before us tonight is whether to apply the city policy as written or whether to make an exception.
So the policy allows you to reduce down to 3 feet. So there's
the
that
intent of the-
discretion, but yes.
The intent of the policy is to reduce to 3 feet if it would add an
That's
additional parking space, and in this case, it doesn't.
Yep.
Can you repeat that? So if we go from 10 feet to 3 feet, it does not create an additional parking space.
Again, it would, when you do it as spaces that length, you get a lot of oversize overhang into the 3 feet, because it's definitely smaller than what we would actually stripe as a space when we were delineating spaces. There are, certain vehicles that could fit in. If you striped it 3 feet, there are vehicles small enough that could utilize that, but that would not
Motorcycle.
be most vehicles.
Go ahead. Is there any flexibility on the approach side in AB 413, or is it statutory minimum? It's 20.
That's 20 feet.
Okay.
The only time it goes down is if you do a curb extension, narrowing the crossing.
Right. I mean, there's no crossing here anyway.
Then it can go down to 15 feet, but otherwise it is, 20 feet.
I want to nail down the net parking change, comparing the status quo with the staff recommendation. It seems like currently there's room on Terrace for 2 cars, just barely. And with the new red curb, there would clearly be room for only 1. Whereas on the Tevlin side, there's currently room for, kind of generous room for 1 car. With the change, there would be in a practical sense, room for 2 cars, right?
That is the intent with the recommendation of adding the space to make a 35-foot space that more permutations of 2 vehicles could fit in, whereas in the current 30-foot space doesn't comply with the intersection policy, and fewer sets of 2 vehicles could fit.
I think what we're looking at is both in the status quo and in the proposed configuration, there are, generally speaking, 3 parking spaces available. And one difference is that in the current configuration, 2 parking spaces on Terrace are a tight fit that doesn't always work. In the new configuration, the 2 parking spaces on Tevlin will be a slightly more generous fit that will be more likely to work. In terms of amount of curb length available for parking, it's actually more. And the proposal actually increases the amount of curb length.
Yeah.
for parking, and doesn't decrease the number of spaces in some cases. Depending on the cars, it might increase the numbers.
Yeah, that was my
Any
impression.
change?
I mean, it does, the kind of space that's there currently is more conveniently located for the one house. You don't have to walk the 20 feet if you get the one around the corner, or if if it's there versus the one around the corner. But I don't know.
Does that house have a driveway?
Yeah.
This is just red paint, right? If we decide we can shorten up the amount of red paint, we could take it down from 10 feet to 3 feet.
It's red paint, yes.
I do want to address the question raised by the public about whether there's really a problem with drivers, with the room that the drivers have, or whether it's a problem with driver behavior. I think that's very hard for us to second guess. We get a complaint from the utility company. I think unless we have a strong reason to doubt it, I'm inclined to take the complaint at face value.
Is that a motion?
Not yet. I'm just
We're
sort of
working-
trying to
working
go
your way
through
there.
the issues that have been raised and consider how I would respond to them. I mean, the public did say that they provided a video of a scenario where the truck was able to make the turn. I wasn't able to see that video because of the way it was posted. It was not available. But even so, that's, I think for me to balance evidence on the one side that in some cases they were able to do it easily versus evidence on the other side that the management there is saying it's a continuing problem. I don't feel qualified to discount what the management of waste management is saying.
Yeah, I mean, especially in the face of comments that there are compliance problems with signed and dated parking spots, right?
Yeah, we've heard about different compliance problems. Some folks have been saying there were compliance problems with red curbing altogether. And if that continues to be the case, then curbing may not solve anything. But I would have to assume that compliance with a time-limited no parking sign would be worse than compliance with a red painted curb.
Yeah.
Has the police department been actively ticketing violations of the red curbs?
I don't know the enforcement history over here. I think the red curb does allow, when there are issues that are affecting waste management, it allows them to more time to address them versus getting the call at 6 in the morning
Oh, yeah.
on the day
I was
of
just
service.
thinking more generally.
But as far as enforcement, it seems like that could fall in the category of next steps if red paint proposal, if we do the red paint that's proposed today, and Waste Management says it's still a problem because people aren't complying with the red paint, and we have to do something more to help Waste Management, and enforcement could be a part.
I am sensitive to the concerns about parking more generally, but that is not something we can vote on tonight. It's something we could consider in the future.
Yeah, I made a note to ask a question about it in the section 7 or 8 when we're we're talking about future issues about.
Okay. Well, I'll bite the bullet, and I recommend it. I move the staff option of painting the curb 10 feet.
Second that.
Well,
Commissioner Barnes,
Yes?
Commissioner Chomsky,
Yes.
Commissioner Von Nightingale,
Yes.
Chair V. Hill McClanahan.
yes.
Motion carries.
All right. The next item is the report on the Phase 9 of the Sidewalk Repair Program.
And I'll get this pulled up and then I'll hand it over to James Sorelli from Public Works colleague.
Good evening, Commissioners. For those who don't know me, I'm James Sorelli. I'm one of the engineers over at the Public Works Department. And I'm here to talk about the Sidewalk Repair Program tonight, about our prioritization criteria update, and also the Phase 9 scope. So before I go into that, I'm going to talk a little bit, just real briefly, about a general program update. Then we'll get into the details of how we're seeing a criteria update, and then we'll dive into more details with Phase 9. So as you may know, over the past 2 years, we've completed 4 phases of sidewalk repair, phases 5 through 8, and that was about 176 locations that we've done. And overall, in the 6 years of this program, we've repaired about 404 locations. That's about 61,000 square feet of concrete. So, with our 5-foot average sidewalks, that's a little over 12,000 linear feet. And if that number kind of still sounds super abstract, it's as if you walked in a straight line through 40 football fields of an average sidewalk width. And this is kind of what it looks like around the city. We've covered a lot of the city in these past 8 phases. Ever since we started from Phase 1, the sidewalks have consistently gotten better. It's much more accessible to walk around the city, but there is still a lot to do. So with that, I'm going to get into the new criteria that we're using for scoping repairs. Just to dial it back a little bit, as a reminder, we did a citywide comprehensive survey through a contractor, Beneficial Designs. They specialize in trail and public right-of-way accessibility. We use their survey results to build a citywide GIS database that allows us to take a more data-driven approach when we do scope these repairs. Prior to Phase 5, Phases 1 through 4, we use more of a complaint-based approach. So some of the important features that came out of that survey are the no-pest path of travel. It's where we're having multiple issues in kind of a single location. Non-planar pedestrian access routes. This is where you're seeing tented sidewalks, typically due to routes where there might not be the typical raised tripping hazard, but because the grade shifts so extremely, it can be inaccessible for people in wheelchairs, people with mobility issues, and seniors. And then there's vertical linear discontinuities. These features capture your typical raised offsets that you see when you walk around. Vertical being when they're kind of the width of the sidewalk, and then linear where it's parallel to the direction that you're walking. And then horizontal openings is basically the feature for capturing holes in the sidewalk, just openings, typically what you might see cracking around a driveway approach. So using those 5 features, we kind of did the following query to get the next few rounds of repairs. One of the limitations right now with this data is that the no best path to travel has limited attribute data. It's a little bit harder to compare a single no best path issue to another one outside of whether it was critical. And the reason being is, although it can capture saying, this area is unstable, this area has a vertical discontinuity, this area is non-planar, it then doesn't actually have qualitative data on that, where if it says it has these three things, it doesn't actually say what's the grade of that non-planar, what's that offset, other than if it was more than 2 inches. And that was what we've used in the past for what we considered critical repairs. So using this data, what we have now, there is a comments field, and when they did their survey, they did comment on where they're seeing more elevated issues. So we're using that as well as the unstable attribute. Any unstable locations are left. This is kind of where the sidewalk's just kind of falling apart, where it might not be a huge discontinuity, but there's so many issues right there that it becomes a big hazard. Now we're using anything more than 5% grade as on the NOPAR. This is based on PROAG, the Public Right-of-Way Accessibility Guidelines. 5% is the maximum grade that you can have on a sidewalk. Generally, there's exceptions, obviously, when the topography doesn't allow for that, like around Albany Hill. So we're using anywhere there's consistently a 5% grade or more from these NOPAR locations. Then anything that's 2 inches or more under vertical linear discontinuities, these are ones we can't shave. If they're less than 2 inches, we can typically shave them, but if they're more than 2, there's just not enough concrete left. So it needs an actual breakout and replace. And then there's horizontal openings. Similarly, either the way the opening works, there's a 2-inch hole or there's a 2-inch offset. So using that query, we have primarily no best path of travel issues, as well as the non-planar and vertical discontinuities for about 111 locations around the city. So similar to before, phases 5 through 8, yes.
Is this all of the sites in town that are remaining that need to be repaired, or are these only the sites you're considering in this phase?
These are the ones that are captured under this prioritization criteria that we're proposing. And this was after we did field review all of these just to make sure that they're actually what we queried capture this in reality, just as an extra QC. So we would use this to take a phased approach to do the next 3 phases. That way we can kind of split it up geographically evenly, and it allows just for a more efficient delivery during construction. So in this year, we do phase 9, and then by 2026, we'd finish up with phase 11. And that's kind of the summary of the updated prioritization criteria. I'm going to talk a bit more in depth about phase 9, and then we can open up to questions, but feel free to stop me if there's anything. So phase 9 is using that criteria in the northeast section that was kind of phased out. It's also capturing some of the remaining critical repairs that we haven't done on Marin. Originally, we had wrapped this into the Marin Avenue Rehabilitation Project to do more efficiently deliver it, save a little P1 money, and as we're going into construction for that. But construction has been delayed, so while we're in the area in phase 9, we're going to capture those repairs so that they are cleaned up, finished, and we're done with those criticals. And then there was a single special access needs issue that came up that is also part of phase 9. So here's the list of locations, which kind of describe which ones are the critical repairs that haven't been done and which one's the special access need. I'm going to just kind of, this is here, but this is kind of visually what phase 9 looks like. Again, it's the northeast side of town. So assuming there's no issues, we'd like to go to City Council for authorization to bid in May, and that will allow us to start public bidding so we can award the contractor before the August recess. And that lets us start construction in fall, and we can wrap it up by November. And in the greater context of the sidewalk program looking forward, so we're back to 1 repair phase per year. That has been typically done in the past. By spring of next year, we'll have fully shaved all 5 zones within the city, which is a perfect time for us to come in with our next sidewalk survey. So ultimately, tonight, we're recommending that the Transportation Commission recommends to council to authorize Phase 9, and also to conditionally recommend the Phase 10 and 11, and with the 3-year schedule, with the conditions that we would prepare a memo that capture the actual locations and give a progress update, similar to how we came with Phase 8. Phase 8 last year. And the main reason is we are required to notify property owners before going into construction phases, before getting that final approval. So this still covers that part of the policy. And with that, I will open it up to questions.
Is sidewalk shaving covered under the same contract as the, what we just discussed?
Sidewalk shaving is a different contract. There's a specialized contractors that do this. There's only a handful that we typically reach out to. But yes, it's a different contractor and a different source of money. It doesn't use P1 funds currently.
Okay. And are people notified in the neighborhoods if sidewalk shaving is going to occur?
Since it's a maintenance activity, we post it on our e-news blasts, we post it on construction alerts, but we don't mailers. We don't send out mailers. The main reason is it's very quick work, and we would blanket a fifth of the city with mailers for something, that's just routine maintenance work.
No, I concur with that because I was walking down the sidewalk on my block the other day and I noticed it had been shaved and I hadn't even heard it. So that seems fine. And as far as all the rehabilitation projects, do they all involve pouring concrete?
Yes, this program specifically is the removal and replacement of concrete.
Okay.
So I appreciated your detailed explanation of the prioritization and criteria and data gathering, but for folks who are less detail-oriented than that, can you give a one-sentence overview of what's changed in the way you prioritize now compared to the way you were doing it a few years ago?
So phases 5 through 8 basically took what was surveyed as like the worst of the worst. We called them critical repairs. It's basically no best path of travel that had greater than a 2-inch offset. That was captured in the attribute data. So that means you're having multiple issues and a 2-inch offset. And that was a majority of what was captured and repaired, as well as non-planar pedestrians where the grade's greater than 8.3%, which is the maximum allowed for a ramp. Not a curb ramp, but like a sidewalk ramp, where you have to have a level landing. And in these cases, they didn't have that level landing, but that was a way to kind of say, like, this is an elevated issue where even a ramp isn't sufficient.
Those are more extreme cases of problems, and now...
Yes.
So are you changing the prioritization because those more extreme cases have all been addressed and the program is now able to turn its attention to some more intermediate?
Yes, phases 5 through 8 addressed the majority of the critical repairs, as we call them. The idea with our data-driven approach is that it's like a triangle where the worst of the worst at the top, and then as we go further, there's going to be more issues, but it'll be more, less severity.
Okay, so the change in prioritization is not to say that there was anything wrong with the way we were prioritizing before. It's just that as the program has moved on and the overall conditions improve, it can be more nuanced.
Yes.
Okay, great. My other question is, has there been any data gathered yet about how well some of the old repairs have held up, or if there are any problems arising again in places that were repaired earlier in earlier cycles?
Not quite. We haven't, we do have a database of where they're all repaired, and it's something I've been wanting us to look at, but we've had just so many repairs that we've needed to get done that kind of took the staff time under the program. But as of right now, we're not aware of any that were repaired that are a serious issue already.
Thanks.
Do you, or how do you coordinate with our urban forester? For example, if the urban forester said, you're about to spend a lot of money pouring concrete and that tree's going to die in 2 years, why don't we just take out the tree instead? Is that ever the kind of conversations you ever have?
We have, yes. So we presented to council in February and kind of had a diagram of how the tree process works. That's a good reference, but we basically consult with our city forester every time we do this work. Our strategy is typically to not impact the roots as little as possible. We curve sidewalks, we narrow them around the trees, and in the rare situations where we think the tree might be too severely impacted, we make sure the city forester kind of evaluates it. And if we do think it needs removal, we do go through the formal Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Commission process. Through phases 5 through 8, we removed maybe 5 trees total, but we worked around 86% of them were around trees, so that was somewhere in the ballpark of 140, if my math's right now. So yeah, they're consulted through the design process. They're brought out during construction if we're seeing issues that we weren't aware of ahead of time, because we can make an educated guess before the concrete's removed, but until it's removed, that's really the time we see whether or not we're going to have large impacts to the roots that weren't obvious before.
Thanks.
Motion or? Oh, we got to do. Yeah, you're right. Are we done with questions? Any questions, Leo? All right, so do we have anybody here who wants to speak on this issue, or everybody here for Kains Adams? Are there any hands raised online?
Not that I can tell.
Okay. Okay, so
You do have one. Brian Martin. Brian, you can speak.
Yes, thank you. Hi, my name's Brian Martin. I wanted to say that I have this sidewalk program has been fantastic, such a modest tax, and all the impact that it's had around town has been great. I noticed at a recent city council meeting that it was mentioned that I think it's a 10-year tax that's going to sunset soon, and they were discussing what to do for a renewal, and I was wondering if you could, I didn't quite catch the details on that, and sort of if there's a plan in place. There was some discussion of, which I thought was great, of expanding the tax, modestly to include improving street lighting and other things around sidewalks that kind of integrate all of that. Is there something you can share on where the project is going in the future as the tax sunsets?
Okay, thank you. Is there any council discussion?
No, I have, no information about the council decided or what they're considering.
I think that's kind of definitely outside of the scope of my knowledge. Maybe Justin has some.
I think there was a discussion at council, this last council meeting, to discuss potential future tax measures, but I don't really have
Okay,
information on what the direction was from that meeting.
all right.
I'll just add, they're still in discussion, so
Okay.
there is no decision made as of today.
Does that mean that council is going ahead with that discussion and it's not going through our commission?
This is related to funding and the parcel tax, so the policies for commission is mostly for approving locations, while larger money discussion and that kind of higher policies set with council.
Makes sense. All right, do we have any further discussion of the motion?
I'll move the staff recommendation.
I'll second.
Roll call?
Commissioner Barnes,
Yes.
Commissioner Chomsky,
Yes.
Commissioner Von Nightigan,
Yes.
and Chair Vihil McClanahan.
Yes.
Motion is approved.
All right.
I do want to echo Brian's comment about how delightful it is to walk around town and just have all these smooth sidewalks. And I have to make myself remember sometimes how bad it used to be, because it's just consistently really good now. And every once in a while, I see a section of cement that's lighter colored, and I'm like, oh, this was repaired, wasn't it? I wonder how bad it was before.
Thanks for your presentation.
Yeah, thank you, James. All right. Here we go. Ins and Adams.
There's another agenda item?
You may want to, I think there might be a few people out in the hallway before do we want to get them now, or do we want to get them before
You can
public
watch
comment?
the screen, right?
Oh, yeah, okay.
All right, next item, Kains and Adams Bikeway Pilot Project. I'll first run through some background on this, reiterating city goals related to climate action and adaptation. The Climate Action and Adaptation Plan adopted in 2019 has a target of 25% reduction in vehicle miles traveled by 2045. And the 2012 Active Transportation Plan had a goal of doubling the share of walking and biking commute modes. The Active Transportation Plan calls for bicycle facilities parallel to San Pablo Avenue along Kains and Adams, providing important north-south routes in the network proposed in the plan. At the plan adoption, the proposed projects for Kains and Adams were identified for additional study before their inclusion in the Active Transportation Plan. And some background since that time. So following the Active Transportation Plan approval in 2012, that called for a further study. Study was concluded in 2017 with a recommendation for internal two-way streets, which we'll talk through the design in a minute. The council referred that back to the commission to be developed as a pilot project, and subsequent to that was brought back with commission direction. The pilot project was approved in 2019, and in 2023 it was installed. Began work in January, substantially was completed in February, with final additions completed in May. So we're now 14 months since the substantially complete date and 11 months since final work completed. There has been some additional signage added since then, and as you saw in some of the comments, some additional signage has been of interest. The objective for the project is really around routes, north-south routes on or parallel to San Pablo, providing safer and less stressful alternative to San Pablo Avenue, and providing regional north-south linkages to facilities in Richmond and El Cerrito to the north and Berkeley to the south. So the pilot project permits two-way vehicular traffic internal to each block with barriers that restrict entrance to the block for motor vehicles. This maintains the prior existing one-way through traffic direction for motor vehicles. Bicyclists are allowed to pass through the barriers and therefore have two-way travel for options. It doesn't provide a dedicated bike lane or bike facility. It is a shared with motor vehicle traffic, similar to other bicycle boulevards in the city with similar widths and volumes. So some numbers, we did do, since the October discussion, another round of data collection, collected in March before spring break, a little earlier than we like to do spring data counts, but we wanted to make sure to have some data to present tonight. The numbers show some variation. These are just 24-hour bicycle counts, so there is just variation from that sample size, but overall, I'd say the Solano side of the streets have seen greater activity both on San Pablo and on Kains and Adams, while on the north side, there maybe has been some movement of getting cyclists off of San Pablo Avenue, and primarily it looks like the numbers on Kains have been really the ones that have comparatively increased on the 600 and 700 blocks there. Looking, last time there was a desire to break out the northbound and southbound directions. It does seem that having the two-way traffic definitely has increased the cycling movements and the contraflow, sort of contra to the one-way vehicle through traffic direction at a number of these points. But again, seeing increasing numbers on San Pablo as well, at Solano in particular. In terms of vehicle counts, we are seeing some additional use of the being able to exit in the new direction by motor vehicles. That's increased more so on Kains with 49 counted, taking advantage of that in March. There was also, we took some 24-hour vehicle counts in conjunction with that and saw a significant increase in the Kains number of vehicles on Kains at Solano to the 1,200 count shown there. And with that, I'll hand it over to Ben to talk a little bit more about other data we've collected.
So we did put out a SurveyMonkey survey that opened a couple of weeks ago. These are preliminary results. The survey is still live, and people are still welcome to submit their feedback on the pilot project. And these results reflect just under 150 respondents. So, as you can see in this slide, the majority of folks responding are using the facility for motor vehicle traffic, but this was a response that you could check multiple boxes, so people are also, I'm sorry, that was the next slide is that was how frequently people use the street. This is what modes of transportation you use on the street, and most folks are using it to drive, but almost as many folks are using it to walk, and just slightly fewer are using it to bicycle. Next slide. So the main concerns with the street design revolve around confusion around the existing driving and parking configuration. There was also significant concern with fast-moving vehicles. And the other responses, which was the kind of the gray bar here, were mostly related to confusion around street configuration and safety concerns at intersections. Next slide. So we asked some questions. How safe do you feel walking along the redesigned street? On a scale of 1 to 5, the average was 4.2. Driving was 3.5, and cycling was 3.0, with 5 being the safest. Then we asked questions about future changes. So how important is it for the redesigned street to accommodate pedestrian safety? 5 being the most, so 4.2. How important is the redesigned street to accommodate cyclist safety? 3.9. How important to accommodate motor vehicle traffic? 3.4. Accommodate parking availability? 3.4. And navigation and wayfinding for cyclists in particular? 2.9. With preferences for future changes, traffic calming measures, converting the street back to one-way vehicle traffic and creating safer crossings for cyclists at intersections were at the top. And then the other responses, which you see in purple here, were mostly just different ways of saying the options that were provided. In terms of feedback on specific designs, installing safer pedestrian crossings at intersections rose to the top. Installing safer bicycle crossings at intersections was next most important. Converting streets back to one way was next most important. And you can read the rest of the designs here. Just kind of some open-ended comments that stuck out to us. There was I'll just read them out. I live on Kains and walk my daughter to school every day. My daughter walks herself home often or with friends that are both walking on bikes. We also regularly walk on Kains to go to the farmer's market, the grocery store, and whatnot. The area that I worry most about crossing is Marin, since I have almost been hit by a car crossing the street several times. Overall, I love these smaller streets having one-way traffic and bike lane usage designed. It is safer for everyone. I hope smaller streets in Albany are redesigned like this. Better signage and connectivity is San Pablo. We do not even know Adams and Kains were bike lanes. It needs to connect easily to junctions on San Pablo and Marin Ave. There should be stop signs for cross traffic to make it actually useful for Bicycle Boulevard. Current design is working well in many ways. Improvements are welcome. Confusion reigns currently. Crossing Marin on Kains is extremely dangerous as a pedestrian, cyclist, and bicyclist. Make it safe for us to use Marin safely with our children. It's mostly useless to me unless it is signal crossing at all major intersections, as it can't be used as a through route. Is it possible to be two-way for bikes, one-way for cars? That would be my preference if clearly marked and signed. So general, these were obviously picked and chosen. There are a lot of comments that came through. But there was a lot of folks commenting on confusion and a lot of folks commenting on intersections in particular. So kind of shifting to the street design and the options before the commission tonight. We have 5 options that we'd like to discuss with you all. That is a lot. But we hope to get through them relatively quickly. So the 5 options include the existing pilot, which is essentially continuing the current street configuration, pursuing legislation to allow left wheel to curb parking. Two-way through traffic with forced right turns is the second option, which continues the current street configuration and removes motor vehicle ingress restrictions and adds forced right turns at egress. So as you're leaving the street, you would be forced to take a right, but you would not be limited to entering onto the street. The third option is the original. It's a kind of combination option with original configuration and two-way streets. So reverting back to one-way travel for both motor vehicles and bicycles where parallel routes on Standage and Jackson exist, and converting to two-way streets on Adams north of Washington and Kains north of Garfield. The fourth is the Chicago contraflow. We're calling it this just because it's been a treatment that's used successfully in Chicago, returning to one-way vehicle traffic, maintaining existing parking configuration, converting bicycle facilities to a shared travel lane in one direction and a contraflow bicycle lane in the other. And number 5 is the back-end contraflow option, which is returning to one-way motor vehicle traffic, shifting parking configuration to back-end angled parking on one side of the street and converting bicycle facilities to a shared travel lane in one direction and a contraflow bicycle lane in the other. And I will go through these with some visuals now so you're not thoroughly confused. So here's the existing pilot option that I just spoke about. Next slide, please. So we talked about this earlier. This is what we have on the street now, restricting ingress onto the street, but allowing, leaving it for local traffic and allowing bicycles to go in both directions. So this is a cross-section of what this looks like. You're probably all familiar with it. The next slide shows the plan view version of this. And the next slide shows kind of a 3D version of this. The pros of this option, there are no changes to existing traffic circulation. There are no changes to existing parking configuration. It provides local vehicle exit options to both sides of each block and potentially slows vehicle speeds due to two-way traffic on a narrow street. The big con for this is just the legislative uncertainty. There was a hope that we could move some legislation at a state level to make it legal to park in the wrong direction as the flow of traffic. That has not seen movement recently, so we're still dealing with this legal limbo. And so that's a main sticking point for this option and why it continues to be an issue. But there's also visibility safety concerns with parking at the left wheel to the curb. There's higher potential for cyclists to get doored by parked vehicles with the tight two-way traffic. There's retaining the one-way feel of the roadway as cars are still inclined to go in only one direction, and kind of seeing it as a 16-foot wide lane. And then there's some concerns from emergency responders about allowing two-way traffic on a narrow street because they can't get to their emergency as quickly. So the second option is the two-way through traffic with forced right turns. The visual cross-section looks similar to the first option, the difference being instead of limiting entry onto the street, except for local vehicles, you're allowing everyone onto the street, but forcing right-hand turns for vehicles as they leave the street, and then allowing potentially allowing for cyclists and pedestrians to travel through the street. So here's a 3D kind of rendering. These are obviously not specific to any intersection, and it changes depending on the width of the street. These can be, kind of done via hardscaping, which is what this is here you see on the right, but this can also, forced right turns can also be forced through signage or striping, not just hardscaping. The pros of this option, no changes to existing bike circulation or changes to existing parking quantity, provides local vehicle access from both sides of the block, increases access by motor vehicles for some residents, slows vehicle speeds, reduces traffic volume, and potential for refuge islands at intersections to create safer experience for cyclists and pedestrians. The cons being higher potential for cyclists to get doored, which was the same issue as kind of we're talking about now. It does not establish designated space for cyclists in either direction. It slows responders by allowing two-way traffic, and changes to motor vehicle circulation may make it more difficult for some residents to access their street by motor vehicle. Option number 3 is a combination between the original configuration and two-way streets. So this is the best way of kind of thinking about this is this map right here. So you see the purple lines, and on the Adams side of the street of the west side of San Pablo, folks would use Jackson up until Washington, take a right onto Washington, and then take a left onto Adams, traveling north. And so north of Washington, it would be existing two-way street, but south of Washington, we would revert back to a one-way street on Adams. And then the same would be the case east of San Pablo, so reverting back to one-way street on Kains up until Garfield, and just moving cycling throughput onto Stanage, and just north of Garfield, keeping it at two-way on Kains so that cyclists could continue through on a through route through the city. That is fairly self-explanatory in terms of like the street design. So you can see the plan view and the 3D view here. The pros here are just east of San Pablo, Stanage provides potential cycling facility on Lower Volume Street with all-way stop control, facilitating cyclists through movements. West of San Pablo, Jackson provides all-way stop control at Washington and Solano, facilitating cyclists through movements, and it reduces the potential to create bottlenecks with narrow travel lanes, including the potential impacts to emergency response time for blocks remaining one way. Cons reduces cycling access to destinations on San Pablo Avenue, reduces cycling access for residents and destinations on Kains and Adams for blocks reverting back to one way for all vehicles, and it does not connect with the future cycling facilities in Berkeley, east of San Pablo. So next slide. So that gets us to option 4, which is the Chicago contraflow option. And you can see some visuals here a little better to understand what this means. This is the cross section if you go to the next slide. And we'll go to the next slide just to kind of get a better understanding. So Chicago contraflow lane essentially reverts us back to one-way traffic in either direction along Kains and Adams, narrows the lane for vehicle travel to 10 feet, and then creates a contraflow bicycle lane going the opposite direction, 6 feet wide. And you can get a kind of 3D view in the next slide. So that's what it would look like from that perspective. And the pros here are that it reverts Kains and Adams back to original motor vehicle travel pattern. It narrows travel lanes beyond the current and original street configuration, potentially slowing traffic. It retains existing curbside parking, what exists today. Provides dedicated space for cyclists in one direction of travel. Reduces the risk of dooring in both directions by providing cyclists with sufficient space to avoid the door zone in one direction and by facilitating eye contact between motorists and cyclists in the other. And it speeds up emergency responders by limiting motor vehicle travel to one way. The cons, as we see them, are that it places cyclists in a position where motorists do not expect to see them. Requires motorists to drive across contraflow bicycle lane to parallel park on one side of the street, as motorists with an opportunity to drive in the contraflow bike lane to overtake cyclists traveling in the same direction, and it limits visibility between left-hand side motorists exiting parking spaces. And and cyclists traveling in the opposite direction. And finally, we have the back-in contraflow option, and I think this is probably best described with a visual as well. This is the cross section. If you go to the next slide, we have the plan view. So this creates, it takes parking on one side of the street and puts it all onto the other side of the street. There's more space along the other side of the street for more parking spaces on one side. So we're not necessarily losing parking, but we haven't done the calculations yet. If you look at the next slide, this is what it'll look like in the 3D version. And then the pros and cons here. The pros are that it reverts Kains and Adams back to the original motor vehicle travel pattern, like some of the others. Narrows the travel lane beyond the original street configuration, potentially slowing traffic. Provides dedicated space for cyclists in one direction of travel, reduces the risk of dooring in both directions by providing cyclists with sufficient space to avoid the door zone in one direction and providing a separated bike facility in the other. Speeds up emergency responders by limiting vehicular travel to one way. And then the cons are that it creates a layout where parked vehicles are likely to reduce the width of the travel lane, places bicycles in a position where motorists do not expect to see them. It requires motorists to enter into the bicycle lane to maneuver in and out of parking spaces. It establishes new parking configuration, removing curbside parking on one side of the street and potentially confusing motorists and reducing parking supply. And it provides motorists with an opportunity to drive in the contraflow bike lane to overtake cyclists traveling in the same direction. So those are our 5 options. We also wanted to take a minute to talk about intersection design. Tonight we're asking for a recommendation from staff on how to move forward with street design, but we did want to mention some of the intersection and wayfinding design ideas that would be further studied and brought to the commission for your recommendation as well. So just kind of going through some of the options related to intersection design that could potentially be incorporated into any of the 5 options before you tonight. The first is adding speed tables or speed cushions to the street. Next slide, there's examples all over the place, and we're just showing a mix of quick build and hardscaped versions of this, just so you can know the various options that are available to us. Another kind of option here, as we talked about in option 2, is this median refuge island with forced right turns for vehicles, but allowing bikes and pedestrians to travel through. And there are some good examples from the city of Berkeley, if you go to the next slide, and the city of Oakland to show kind of what refuge islands look like. In Berkeley, these 2 options, one is a quick build option and one is a hardscaped option, and they are forcing right turns for motor vehicles at the intersection. The Oakland version example here is just a pedestrian refuge island that doesn't force right turns. Next slide. Mini roundabouts are another option being considered for intersections. If you go to the next slide, you can see these are kind of all along California Street in Berkeley, hardscaped versions, and then there's some quick build versions that have been popping up around the Bay Area, including Redwood City and East Palo Alto. Next slide. Pedestrian bulb outs are also a potential option. So expanding the corner sidewalk to make the crossing shorter for pedestrians. And next slide, you have a hardscape version example on on Marin in Albany. And then there's some quick build options that you can see here in Redwood City and Oakland. Next slide, crosswalks, just straight basic crosswalks to help pedestrian throughput, make it safer for pedestrians. And they can be basic crosswalks. If you go to the next slide, we've got an example of a crosswalk in Marin, but there's also opportunities to get creative with crosswalks, as you can see here in Chinatown in Oakland and Castro Street in San Francisco, and increase visibility of the crossing for pedestrians. So those are kind of the options in terms of intersection treatments that we're considering. Wayfinding signage, I just wanted to give a kind of a shout out to the different types of wayfinding options that we'd be considering along the street to make it easier for cyclists and pedestrians to understand where they were going, regardless of which street design we go with, just to kind of explain the difference between these types of signage options. We've got confirmation signage, which is essentially saying, you know, you're in the right place, you're where you want to be. You know, bicycle boulevard signage is an example of that. There's turn signage, essentially to say, you know, you have to make a turn if you want to stay on the route that you're on. Decision signage, which is just, this is telling you this is the way to the following destinations. And then advanced crossing signage, which is, you know, you're approaching a route, so be careful in this intersection. And so that's the signage. Those are the signage kind of options that we're looking at for the next iteration of this street design. And so the staff recommendation, what we're asking you to, what we're recommending tonight is that the commission go with option 4, which reverts both streets to a one-way motor vehicle and parallel parking configuration and introduces a contraflow bicycle lane on both Kains and Adams Street. We recommend including in the new design development of enhanced wayfinding measures to facilitate easy navigation for cyclists and pedestrians through the facility, and we recommend developing potential intersection improvements as part of the project to provide safer crossings, particularly for cyclists traveling contraflow who might not be anticipated by vehicle traffic. So the next steps, just to kind of put this in context, are confirming the street design and a grant application direction with the Transportation Commission tonight. Confirming street design and grant application direction with City Council in May. Developing detailed street designs based on feedback from the Commission, City Council in May and June. And conducting additional community outreach on final street designs in May and June, and then applying for a grant, which is alluded to at the beginning of this, for active transportation program grant for a quick build version of the project in June of this year. So we're hoping to move quickly on this and seeking your input, and that's where I'll leave it.
All right, do we have any commission questions?
Following up on the grant, there's a really tight timeline you showed. Is this grant a time-limited opportunity for the city?
It's on a 2-year cycle, so the next opportunity for active transportation program grants from the state would be 2 years from now.
If we wanted to take advantage of this cycle, we have to submit something
It's a June deadline.
by June. And how many decisions do we have to make before submitting that grant application? Because far as, if we just choose one of the 5 options or some variant of it and say we want to apply for the grant, how much do we have to think about intersection improvements and medians and stop sign changes and all of that as part of applying for the grant, as opposed to something that we would make a decision once we have the grant?
We don't need a full design to apply for the grant, but the further along we can get it developed, the more competitive it might be. But that's why we're seeking direction for the overall layout. We're going to continue working on the newer elements, but we don't need full design decisions before the grant's submitted.
Okay, I'm just confronting the fact that we're a skeleton crew here, and I'd rather, to the extent possible, when we're talking about intersection treatments and where we could add stop signs or change the direction of two-way stops or put in neighborhood traffic circles or all of that, is it reasonable to postpone those discussions until we have more commissioners here?
We're not seeking commission action on the intersection treatments. We'd welcome any feedback you have tonight on that, but we're only seeking action on the cross-section component of this tonight.
Regarding the Chicago usage of this contraflow lane, do you happen to have any images of those? Like Google satellite images of those to show? The thing I'm most curious about is whether they've used it in scenarios where there is street parking, parallel street parking on both sides of the street and a large number of driveways.
There are many examples. Chicago is just a city that's put them around the city a little bit more robustly than other cities, but we can find some examples for you that suggest that it's a fairly apples to apples comparison between Kains and Adams and these streets.
My final question is about diverters or medians. You mentioned them in a few different contexts. One was let me see. In option 2, there would be diverters preventing through motor vehicle movements at the intersections. And in any of the options, you mentioned diverters or medians as intersection safety improvement. Are there versions of those diverters or barriers that are much smaller than the ones you showed in the pictures that would fit more easily in an intersection of smaller streets?
It gets into so you lose potentially the refuge
Right, I'm thinking about
distance and are more
whether there's a design for a barrier like that or diverter or whatever the right term is that functions to prevent through motorist traffic but doesn't function as a refuge because there's no room for a refuge there.
Yeah. There are some that just do it with signage, like right turn only, but I think we would have to, that's one of the things we would need to look into more, but I think it would essentially be probably a sort of whatever vertical post you might do on a solid yellow line if it's getting to more of just, 1 foot of width to work with, that kind of thing.
And is there a version of that that's flexible enough to allow motor vehicles exiting to turn right or left but not go straight?
I think then you're getting into trouble with the movements from the other direction, but we would have to look more at that.
The only intersection I can think of that seems to work like that is Virginia at BART station, but that's an extremely complex design. A lot of cement and a specialized signal, so I just didn't know. Hoping there was something simpler that would just be constructed out of flexible posts or something to have that same effect, but you're not aware of anything like that?
We would need to look more closely at that.
Okay. All right, that's it for me.
The intent there would be to allow more of the movements to cross streets, but still restrict the continuation onto the next block. Is that?
That's it for my questions.
Would this, I don't know if it's being considered in this measure, but or in this item, but moving the stop signs from Stanage to Kains, is that something that's being considered?
It is one of the things we plan to look at as part of this.
Do we know, would part of this be working on an improved crossing for Marin, or is that part of the larger Alameda County bike network work?
So the crossings at Kains and Solano and Kains and Marin, while they respected, us being in this pilot and leaving the majority of what we have out of the scope of their work, we did ask them to look at those crossings. So those plans are continuing, and we would, depending on the direction here, continue to work with them to improve those major crossings. The designs that they're developing has a flashing beacon, rapid rectangular flashing beacon for the Solano crossing, and looking at a Hawk, a pedestrian hybrid beacon like what's at Dartmouth and San Pablo for the Marin and Kains crossing.
Okay.
Those are happening regardless of what we decide tonight, right?
I mean, as long as what we decide tonight is
Keeps the facility.
Compatible with this.
It's compatible with the facilities being at those crossings, yeah. I do have one of the Chicago examples I can screen share. So this isn't a similar width street, has parking on both sides. At the intersection, it approaches along the curb and then jogs over to begin park.
Can you see if there is a driveway farther up the street? Because I see one near the corner, but if you just turn 90 degrees to the right now, there isn't. There wasn't really a mid-block driveway. That's the scenario I was most curious if they've solved that.
Yeah.
There's one, okay. There's a case of parallel parking and a mid-block driveway alongside this. Oh, is there a bike lane there?
Yeah, it's just not painted, it looks like.
It's just faded. That really is a contraflow bike lane right there.
There's a drive. They have fewer driveways.
So they don't have them like in between every parking space the way we do. But at least they have some, and it seems.
There are other examples from other cities that we can share.
They don't consider a mid-block driveway to be a showstopper.
All right, is there any other questions? All right, well, I'd like to thank everybody for their patience and open it up to public comment, I guess.
We moving to public comment?
Yeah. Sorry.
You want to start in the room or online?
Yeah, let's start with the folks in the room. And is any of the people who went out into the hall still there, or they all go home? Oh, they're back. Okay.
We have 5 hands raised online.
Sorry, Chair, could you not understand you? What are you asking?
It's time for public comment.
Yes, there are people here for public
Yep,
comment.
I know.
Great. Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Max, and I live on the 600 block of Kains. I want to express my strong support for the Kains-Adams Bikeway project and support the staff recommendations that were outlined in the memo, including making safety upgrades across the corridor. The Kains Bikeway has been an invaluable resource for our family for getting around town, and we use the Bikeway almost every day. While the current bikeway configuration is a strong step in the right direction, we think that there needs to be more done to make it safer. The biggest challenges that we faced with these roads have been associated with car speed, volume, and also unsafe passing distances. To ensure these projects achieve their goal of creating a safer passage, the following changes we think should be made. We want to add vehicle median diverters at key intersections and add stop signs or traffic circles at intersections along the bikeway. This pilot has been a great opportunity to evaluate and learn what's worked and also what needs improvement. Our daughter is almost 4 and will be riding her own bike soon, and we want to be confident that the streets that she rides on are safe and accessible for her and other kids like her. Thank you for your time. And do you want to say anything, love? Not today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Give me a moment. Okay, this is movable. Great. Good evening, Commissioners. Nick Pilch speaking for Albany Strollers and Rollers. Albany Strollers and Rollers supports upgrading bicycle facilities on Kains and Adams, a long time, over 10 years, important project for us, and notes that it is also now part of the Alameda County San Pablo Avenue Corridor project and represents an important section of a regional bikeway. At this time, Albany Strollers and Rollers believes the pilot is working well and is successful, and we favor option 1, which is concept 3, from the original consultant study. There have been no collisions, bicyclists can travel both ways, and motorists now have an extra option of exiting their blocks from either end. If we accept the pilot as is, we will save a lot of money and precious staff time and not incur further delays in this project by any redos. As noted in the staff reports, the biggest issue that staff has with the project is that residents have not begun to park on the side of the street in the direction of travel. The vast majority park as if it were still a one-way street. However, we are frustrated that staff has done no significant education or gentle enforcement, such as written warnings, to coax drivers to park in the correct direction. We've also called for more signage about two-way motor vehicle traffic because we have evidence that residents, street users, and even staff still believe motorist traffic is one-way only. We feel this lack of action has been detrimental to the pilot and feel the staff should pursue these actions. One solution is to deprioritize enforcement of parking the wrong way. We have evidence from the next city over, Berkeley, that it does not enforce wrong-way parking on its streets that are configured like Kains and Adams. Staff has the power to deprioritize enforcement, and council has the ultimate power to direct staff to deprioritize. We are perplexed that staff wants to die on this 3-foot hill. Changing the current pilot will result in more delay and the use of significant precious staff time as well as a lot of money. We could almost be done right now. Should staff not deprioritize the enforcement of wrong-way parking nor council direct them to, then Albany Strollers and Rollers supports the consultant's original concept 2 of the contraflow bike lane, which is this Chicago-style option 4 in this meeting. However, Albany Strollers and Rollers will also insist and support the treatments on the side streets, such as stop signs, median barriers, and the like, to further improve the streets for cyclists, which the staff has already confirmed that they're going to look into. Personally, I think, not speaking for Strollers and Rollers, that option 2 has a lot of potential, but Strollers and Rollers has not had a chance to discuss and study it yet. Thank you for your time and attention.
Hello, I'm Christine. I live on the 800 block of Adams Street, and I'm all for providing safe access to our roads for bicyclists, pedestrians, and cars. But that being said, this pilot program has been riddled with problems since its beginning. It's been in place for 15 months, and although at your October meeting you said you would be making new signs and enhanced information on the roads to make it safer and to make it more informational. To date, none of this has happened. There are still only 4 signs installed for 8 blocks that are involved. The black two-way arrows are confusing because they are, for all of our residents, and especially on Adams Street, they still believe that those arrows only belong to bicycles. at least once a week, I get yelled at and stopped by a pedestrian or another vehicle, telling me that I'm going the wrong way and saying I'm a crazy old lady who doesn't know how to drive her car. I left my glasses. Excuse me, I can't read what I wrote. Being yelled at is not pleasant, and it should not be happening. The options, several of them, it really doesn't matter. You'll pick the option that you want to pick. I think some are better than others, but there's other people that can decide that. But regardless of what option you choose, I want you to ensure your immediate action on installing proper and informational adequate signage on all the blocks that are impacted, and to ensure that everyone, the residents and people that are visiting the area, understand that the new rules, whether it's one-way or two-way or how the parking goes. Over half the drivers, motor vehicles and bicycles on Adams Street come from out of the area, and they have not been given information on the rules, however they've been changed. So please, whatever you decide, make sure that it is smooth and that there's proper information given out. Thank you.
Thank you. There? Oh, okay. All right, if there's no one left in the room, we can go to the hands online.
Go ahead, Brian.
Hi, my name is Brian Martin, a resident of Adams Street on the 600 block. I wanted to say I thought the pilot has been a great success in a lot of ways so far, and I'm happy to see that the City Council, that the staff is recommending to continue and improve it. I think everybody that lives around here is aware that the bowling alley project, for example, was approved, and there's a lot of changes in zoning that will result in a lot fewer parking spaces for these homes than what we're used to, these massive developments, and in fact 30 fewer parking spaces than there are homes for the bowling alley project. So there's going to be a lot of pressure on parking and traffic, and the more the city can do to develop infrastructure that will enable cyclists to get around and people to travel where they need to go without cars, the better off they'll be. It seems like there was literature going around my block and other blocks saying that the project was going to result in chaos and anarchy and bike mobs going up and down the streets, and I don't know, they were promising all sorts of horrible things. And we haven't seen any of that come true. The previous speaker, she's 100% right that there needs to be better signage, better, whatever is implemented needs to be clearer to people in cars which directions are okay to travel in. That's been the only downside that I've seen and heard of. If the city's not able to deprioritize the ticketing of cars on the other side of the contraflow direction, then I think the Chicago contraflow would be a good option. I would also think diverters at the intersections would help make this a much more quiet bike boulevard for people to get around and encourage people to get around without cars. And so option 2 is interesting, but I think Chicago contraflow with some diverters at some point down the line would also be good. Thank you.
Go ahead, Carrie.
Hi, my name is Carrie Schulman. And first of all, I want to thank you for your focus on reducing greenhouse gases and recognizing that a great way to do that is encouraging more people to bike and making biking a more pleasant experience. I have 2 kids who attend Ocean View Elementary School, so we take Kains Avenue twice every day during really high traffic times. I also occasionally take Adams if I'm going to go somewhere on San Pablo after going to Ocean View, but that's not as frequent. But when we take Kains during rush hour, there is a steady stream of cars coming down Kains with us, which is far too many cars for it to feel like a comfortable bicycle boulevard. So I'm a strong proponent of option number 2, because that is the only one that will reduce the amount of cars on those streets. Option 2 should have little negative effect for neighbors. It's not going to remove any parking because it's going to have two-way traffic. People driving might have to go 1 block out of their way to circle around the block to get to their street. Going 1 block out of your way is not a big deal in a car, so it shouldn't be a big deal for neighbors, but would be a huge benefit for cyclists to have fewer cars streaming down Kains Avenue during rush hour. I think option number 3 is a pretty terrible idea. Kains is going to have significant improvements for crossing Solano and Marin, so you're losing out on them if you move the bike route to Stanage. Jackson is 3 whole blocks away from San Pablo, so that's not a good alternate route for bikes. And also going north on Jackson, we actually take that to go home from Ocean View, and there's no bike lane going north on Jackson, and there's a lot of cars during rush hour on Jackson. So going northbound, unless you plan to add a northbound bike lane, not a good option to go north on Jackson on bike. So option number 2, I really would love to see that happen. That would just be so fantastic. I also wanted to point out for the intersection treatments, as a cyclist, I'm not a fan of bulb outs. Unless you have bike lanes, the bulb outs, if there's no bike lane, then the bulb out will get in the way of where bikes should be. So I would prefer not having bulb outs unless you have bike lanes. For slowing down cars, I think traffic circles are a really nice way to slow down cars. I think they're much more effective than the tables. So yeah, option 2, yay, go for it. Thank you very much for listening.
Go ahead, Jonah.
Hello, my name is Jonah Bush. I'm a resident on the 600 block of Kains Avenue. My wife and my newborn daughter are very happy to live here and to be daily pedestrians and frequent cyclists, although we're waiting for the newborn to be old enough to join us on the bike. We don't own a car, but we are occasional drivers as well. I've been very supportive of the current system, which is option 1, but option 4 sounds great. And I expect that if Albany moves forward with this recommendation, that we will end up enjoying option 4 as much or more as what we have now. Our highest priority is to maintain two-way safe bike travel. Option 1 does that. It sounds like option 4 may do that even better by converting the de facto one-way street for cars into a de jure one-way street for cars. Better because there's probably a lot less confusion over what's happening. So, support and please move ahead with making the street safer for bikes. Just zooming out a little bit with the balance of my time, there's an article in Berkeley Side this week about 700 new grad students who are going to move into University Village this fall. Many of them won't have cars, and so it's just really important for us as a city to continue expanding and improving our bicycle network. So thank you and good luck to the commission and the council.
Go ahead, Clay.
Clay Larson, I hope you can hear me. I live in the 600 block of Adams Street. I sent an email this morning with several comments regarding the Kains and Adams bikeways. My comments concern the bicycle count data and the failure by staff to make any attempt to engage with and get feedback from residents living on Kains and Adams. Regarding the bicycle count data, I think a competent analysis shows that there was a decrease in bicycle traffic on Adams, while at the same time there was an increase in bicycle traffic on San Pablo Avenue. So overall, the data indicate that the goal of providing a low-stress alternative to San Pablo Avenue wasn't met. This really shouldn't be a surprise in the case of Adams Street, which is literally a 5-block bikeway to nowhere. I commented on staff's failure to survey Kains Adams residents. The staff report describes the need for targeted public engagement. I think this terminology confused staff. The language is undoubtedly taken from the 2012 ATP, which called for additional public outreach targeted, but then it continued at residents on Kains and Adams. Staff made no attempt to target outreach to anyone. Staff report notes that the real goal was to obtain feedback from a wide cross-section of the community. I also commented on the 5 options for Kains and Adams listed in the staff report. Several of the options can be immediately eliminated. Option 1 is impossible. Option 2 would make right-side parking worse. And option 5 would significantly reduce the parking supply. Option 4 was recommended by staff, restores one-way travel, but adds a counterflow bike lane. This option doesn't address the safety issues for bicyclists associated with counterflow parking. In fact, it makes things worse. By requiring bicyclists to ride in a narrow 5-foot lane immediately adjacent to parked cars facing the bicyclist, you certainly increase their likelihood of a collision. The 2017 Kains Adams Bikeway Survey rejected the counterflow bike lane concept, finding that it was too dangerous. It was too dangerous in 2017, it's too dangerous now. Option 3 is interesting. It creates an original counterflow two-way, it's referred to as an original configuration / two-way combination. It would provide two-way traffic on just 2 blocks of Adams and 1 block of Kains. And it appears to address all the safety issues. There was some concern about its distance from San Pablo Avenue, I guess in the case of Jackson, but 8th Street's 3 blocks from San Pablo Avenue, and Berkeley seems to handle that. I was disappointed that the staff, my last point, the staff did not include an option to simply restore the pre-pilot project conditions. Let's call this option 6. This would be a perfectly reasonable response to a failed project, and the bicycle count data has shown that the pilot was a failure. I would also note I've been involved with this since 2010. I think it's unfortunate that we're going to rush through some decisions based on some largesse available from the county.
Go ahead, Bryce.
Hello, this is Bryce Nesbitt. Quick audio check.
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. So my name is Bryce Nesbitt. I am presently a Berkeley resident and until recently a member of the Transportation Commission in Berkeley. But grew up in Albany, went to Albany Middle School, went to Albany High School, and travel along all of these streets frequently via various means, including car and bicycle. I would like to speak as strongly as possible against the contraflow lane. If a contraflow lane is put on Kains, it will cease to be my favorite route anymore. I think that's a particularly poor choice, and that there are so many better choices available here. The Kains experiment in particular is incomplete due to a lack of some signage, due to some white stripes on the section north of San Pablo that make the street feel like a freeway on-ramp, like a very fast street where you should be going fast. I think there are some soft things that haven't yet been done on that Kains-Adams experiment, and that until those things are tried, the simple things, that you really shouldn't be looking at these really big and expensive interventions. The biggest thing that can be done for Kains is to reduce the amount of cut-through traffic. I have followed people all the way from Mechanics Bank, across Solano, across Marin, who then turn right on Gilman. They're using Kains as a through route. And that can be stopped very, very readily and to the benefit of everybody. Local residents, cyclists, pedestrians, absolutely everybody except a few people who were apparently looking for a faster route than San Pablo. As far as Kains go, I also think that if you use these lower cost methods in order to complete the original experiment, then you can save some money for something really big and valuable. And that would be the connections at the north end. In particular, if I take Kains North and I want to continue past El Cerrito Plaza, I have to go through that zoo of the El Cerrito Plaza. So maybe that money and those grants can be used to figure out a good way through there and fix Kains a low-cost, easy way. I'm available. I encourage you to think about it, and I'd be happy to be involved in any way that, that staff would be interested in. I'm happy to share my experience with you if that's of interest. And a good evening to everybody.
Go ahead, Amy.
Hey, I just got home from work, just logged on, so sorry if I repeat what other people say or miss something. I lived on the 900 block of Kains for more than 30 years. I spend a lot of time at home. I'm self-employed. I've observed people riding on the Kains Avenue Bikeway pretty consistently. Bike traffic in both directions. There's a lot of kids with their baseball bats and their backpacks, kids going to school, parents with their cargo bikes, toting their kids or their groceries, their seniors, and other people riding to the YMCA. There's just really a wide variety of people. People are using it. It's working. The only real conflict is when residents are trying to exit their blocks by car in the contraflow direction. We get yelled at by people coming in, and they're not aware of the two-way internal traffic because there's a sign that has two arrows and people don't really know who that's for. They think that they say it's for cyclists, and they block us and they yell at us. We've asked for the words "all vehicles" to be put on that sign, which would be very clear, and then that would settle that. That's literally the only conflict. Also, mapping apps still don't reflect the proper circulation patterns. So as Bryce said before, this isn't complete because the signage isn't complete and the mapping isn't complete. You know, that will help. That will lead to even more bike traffic than there is and more two-way car traffic, which will slow cars down because right now, since it's almost a one-way street, people really speed because that's what happens on one-way streets. The contraflow parking has been a zero issue, nothing. If anything, it's safer for bicyclists because drivers are looking right at the cyclists coming up and their doors open toward the sidewalk. So it's not dangerous at all. It's a non-issue. One of your transportation commissioners did work at the city of Berkeley and stated that in almost 40 years of these similar configurations on bicycle boulevards, he recalls no accidents or incidents. There have been no accidents or incidents due to contraflow parking. So it's really much ado about nothing. So if you keep it the way it is, Berkeley has basically piloted this for almost 40 years, make the intersections safer by having stop signs, daylighting the intersections as is now the law of California AB 413. That will make it safer for everybody. Remember that you guys are the Active Transportation Advisory Committee for Albany. You're the designated one. So please don't forget that you're responsible to protect Albany's most vulnerable users, cyclists and pedestrians. So thank you very much.
Final call. Raise your hand if you still wish to speak. This item. Not seeing any more hands.
All right. Discussion?
No. Go.
Well, let's see. Can I start with the question of signage? I know there was discussion recently, several months ago, about the problems of people not believing that the street was two-way for drivers and harassing drivers. And this was a serious problem that's been brought up again tonight. And I think we proposed changing the signs on the entry of the block to emphasize that better. Can you give any update on the project to improve that signage?
We should be getting the all vehicles signage added shortly at the 4 locations where there's the two-way arrows. So that's still in the progress. I mean, I think the road still reads as one way. It won't address the navigation component, but the confusion around what those signs are supposed to be communicating should be addressed. And even if there's direction to move with a different configuration here tonight and at City Council, what's out there now will still be in the ground until a future project would make a change. So,
Which could be years, right?
Which, depending on what the plan is or what the direction is and how we secure funding, yes, it could be a while before it changes.
So the signage improvements that say all vehicles are in the works and they will be installed regardless of what we decide tonight?
Yes.
Okay, that's, I guess, good news. It's very frustrating to be sitting here having to make a decision about whether the project works in its current configuration, knowing that it doesn't work, knowing that that improvement is in the pipeline, not knowing if that will solve the particular problem that's been brought up about motorists being harassed. It's just hard to make a judgment about whether the current configuration is viable or not, because we haven't really seen it in the form where the signage is improved. So if it weren't for the grant, I would say we can't make this decision tonight because we don't, because as several people have said, the project is incomplete. And I mean, you can argue all day about what constitutes being complete, but I think at least having those signs would address one of the major concerns. So I'm reluctant to move ahead with a recommendation to change anything without having that information in hand, but if it's, knowing that it's a possible 2-year delay to get more grant funding if we need it, it's a hard decision to make. So that's about whether we should do anything at all tonight. I think a lot of people are mystified about why contraflow parking is considered to be a problem, because it's so prevalent in so many places. And on my block, I mean, places all over the city, all over the Bay Area, people frequently park on the opposite side of the street without doing a 3-point turn, and I'm not aware that it's been enforced. I can see that it causes more of a problem here in the sense that if people don't know that it's a two-way street, they will harass the drivers who are going in the unexpected direction. That's a big problem. If that's the problem with contraflow parking, then it seems like the solution is in improving the signage rather than in getting rid of the contraflow parking. If there's a safety problem with contraflow parking, the Chicago lane has been proposed as an improvement. I'm not exactly clear on how it improves anything in terms of safety. I can see pluses and minuses. I mean, honestly, the difference between option 1, the way it is now, and option 4, the Chicago contraflow, is very subtle for most practical purposes. Most drivers are going in the familiar direction. Bike riders are going both directions. If we paint the lane, and everybody's parking in the familiar direction. If we paint the contraflow lane all those people will continue doing pretty much what they're doing today. It's just that the striping will be a little different, and the law around parking will be different. I don't think the safety around parking will be all that different. Some people have said the contraflow lane would improve safety by separating the northbound and southbound traffic so that bike riders wouldn't feel like a car is just going to hit them head on. Some people have said the contraflow lane would make safety worse by forcing bike riders into a zone right up against the parked cars where they would be more vulnerable to exiting movements or dooring. I think those differences are subtle, and it's hard to judge, honestly, which is better. But it seems like there's something going unsaid here, which is that the city seems to have an urgency around eliminating the contraflow parking, which it's a little hard for me as a commissioner to buy into that because nobody has really come out and said what the urgency is. But maybe that's above my pay grade as a commissioner. Maybe that's a matter for city staff and city council to decide that it is urgent to eliminate the contraflow parking, even though they haven't expressed why it's urgent. And if that's the case, then I guess option 4 is a better option than option 1. I'm not really interested in 3 or 5. I think 3, unfortunately, gives up on the idea that this project was designed as an alternative to putting dedicated bike lanes on San Pablo Ave the way they're going to do in Oakland and South Berkeley. And we didn't have the stomach for that here, and the compromise was made years ago that, well, the bike advocacy community will accept going 1 block out of our way. Now being asked to go 2 blocks out of our way, I shouldn't say our since I'm speaking as a commissioner, but cyclists being asked to go 2 blocks out of their way is not really what they bargained for when that decision was made. Option 5, contraflow with back-in parking. It's an interesting idea. I don't really think it's practical with driveways. I don't really see how it would work with all the driveways because parking has to be arranged to allow residents access to their driveways, and it seems like diagonal parking, most of the diagonal parking spaces would overlap one driveway or the other, and you'd have very few opportunities to put in a diagonal parking space that doesn't overlap a driveway. Do you agree with that assessment?
I think where they're closer spaced driveways, it would be larger parking impact. There are a couple blocks that have some larger stretches that may take advantage more of the efficiency, but there aren't. A large segment of that is not the case for Kains and Adams.
Yeah, I'm just afraid that too many places we'd have to like cut the number of parking spaces in half or something if we went with back-in parking, and I don't think that's within the scope of what we're willing to do here.
It was an interesting idea.
I'm glad you presented it.
It was bold.
It's good to see what it is, but I don't think we can really consider it. So 1 or 4 I've talked about my preference to postpone the decision, but if there's some urgency that can't be stated out loud, then 4 seems okay. I do want to talk about option 2, which I think has a lot of potential, and the reason it's hard to recommend it tonight is that we just haven't seen much detail about it. We haven't seen we have been told that streets like Washington and Portland are too narrow to accommodate a full-fledged median refuge like is shown on 9th and Cedar. If that's correct, then what treatment can we do on Washington and Portland Dartmouth, any other street where we want to limit the movements of motor vehicles to prevent them from treating Kains as a long through street. I think we want to investigate that regardless of which option we go with. I think if we go with option 2, then those diverters are a core essential part of what option 2 is. You don't have option 2 if you don't put in those diverters. What you have is a long through street with traffic going both directions and a lot of congestion, and I don't think anybody would be happy with that. If we go with one of the other options, we still want to consider the diverters as an improvement, as an enhancement, which as many people have asked for, and you've told us that we don't need to think too much about those enhancements tonight. They can come in a later meeting as part of using the grant funding instead of applying for it. It's great, but I feel like we can't really recommend option 2 unless we know if those diverters are workable. So,
I mean, there's an alternate version of 2 that uses the traffic circles, which I think would fit, not traffic circles, but the islands, roundabouts, mini roundabouts, I guess they call them.
Neighborhood traffic circles.
Which would have roughly the same effect, at least for traffic flow, right? You can't blast through quite as quickly. But
You can't blast through quickly, but you still have the problem of a driver being able to travel from Gilman Street to El Cerrito Plaza on Kains Avenue.
Fair enough.
And at least a couple of the speakers pointed out that part of the reason there's so much car traffic on those streets, and part of the reason I think speed is a tougher nut to crack, and I'm not sure I exactly agree that that's the problem with speed, but certainly the problem with the volume is that people are using them as through streets. If people were using those streets just to go one block to get to a destination on that street, I would have to think the traffic volume would go down.
I agree.
So I'd like to know more about option 2. I think it's very promising. I think it could solve a lot of the problems that people have addressed. I'm not confident that it would work. I'm hesitant to recommend it and say that's the way we're going, and then study it a little more and find out that, oh, well, if we put the diverter here, then these people have to drive, not 1 block, but 5 blocks out of their way to navigate a maze of one-way streets to get to their house every day. Or, maybe the only way to make it work is to have the one-way streets, it wouldn't be one-way streets in option 2, but whatever those barriers are going to do, they're going to block certain traffic movements, which certain people might be relying on to get to and from their house. And I just don't know how bad that problem is. So if we recommend option 2 and we look at it and find out that it actually doesn't work that well because there isn't room for the kind of barriers we want, or because barriers are too restrictive and people can't drive where they need to drive, or whatever reason, would we be able to back out of it? I'm asking the commission as much as staff. I'm not sure I'm asking a question that can be answered right now. I'm just trying to express why this feels like a position. I don't think I've ever felt as a commissioner that it's so hard to pick an option and move forward with the constraints and limited information that we have.
I mean, from my experience, I don't know if I'm supposed to speak from my experience, but I've ridden this, and 4 basically codifies this sort of intuitive behavior on the street, right?
Right. It's the same as 1, except the law is different, and a few people may change their driving behavior. But
I mean, I do my ranking here was 2 and 4 in first place. 5 because it's interesting rather than because it's practical. 1 is a good option. I don't know about 3. 3, especially on the far side, is kind of rough. Jackson continues to climb up a block past Solano. I worry about people with different needs, people with older people might have trouble doing the climb. It's not a big climb, but yeah, I do hear, you hear people complaining about getting yelled at for going the wrong way. And 4 would certainly remove that problem by just reverting the street, cars on the street, to the same way. I think it's compelling the positive where we visually narrow the lane by having the painted, like it looked like a green painted contraflow lane, visually narrowing the traffic lane, which may slow cars down. It often does in those circumstances. The con being that the people will try to go around cyclists in that contraflow lane sometimes, because cars are so wide these days. I think the analysis is kind of spot on. I guess my primary interest as a user of the street is really just the crossings. Like, I think that any of these plans could work with adequate treatment of the crossings to improve flow through. Like, the daylighting is inadequate on a lot of these streets. The fact that there's no stop and no daylighting makes them difficult to cross. Like, you're just, you creep and you creep and you creep and you creep until you're about 6 feet out of the lane, and then you go, because you never know when somebody's going to be barreling down Portland or Washington. I don't really have any experience with the Adams side. I ride it at night on the way back from these meetings, and that's about the only time I interact with it. So I don't know. I mean, I like 2. It has a lot of appeal. I would like a version of 2 that reverted the street to one way for automobiles. But I don't know. I guess I just don't have super strong feelings, other than, like, I do feel like taking it back to one way for automobiles might reduce the conflict that residents have with flow-through traffic. But of course, reducing flow-through traffic, or reducing bypass traffic from San Pablo would also reduce the conflicts that they have by reducing the number of cars on the road.
I think the hope is that if we went with option 2, the natural way that people park would adjust. Going with the option we went with, we weren't sure how people's parking behavior would be affected. But in fact, we now see everybody parks in the original direction. I would hope with option 2, people would be entering the block from both sides.
Yeah, like
And
with the bollards gone.
And they'd be more likely to park in the approved direction. Some people might still park in the contraflow direction, just like they do everywhere in town, because you see the parking space on the other side and you just take it and you don't bother to turn around. But that's no different than any other street, and I don't see why contraflow parking would be a crisis on Kains or Adams if we used option 2. We see why it's considered a crisis now, but even less so with option 2.
I've been thinking about this for 7 years. I was on the council when this first came up. And my thinking is that there's always going to be new people driving down the street, and it should be as intuitive as possible given their experience. And we also have to keep in mind that the pilot that was envisioned was never implemented because motorists refused to do the, Y-turn and park in the other direction. That was what was conceived of in the pilot. And it became very clear right away that our citizens vetoed that idea. They just weren't going to do it. And so I think making it as simple and with as little confusion for users of the street is a good idea. I like number 4, by far the best. I have some concerns about the counterflow cycle lane. However, there's one advantage of getting doored if you're heading into the car, and it's because you kind of bounce off the door a little bit instead of getting pinned. Which, if you ever, I got pinned once, a kid who jumped out of a minivan. I was like, barely stopped in time, but I was kind of wedged into the car. His mom was not amused. So, option 5, back and angle parking. We went through this discussion about Solano Avenue, and what the traffic engineers told us was that it doesn't really work on streets with a high volume of traffic because you have to be able to back your car up. And when there's a lot of traffic on the street, if someone's on your bumper, you can't back up. So it would not work. I think the consensus was it would not work on Solano. However, I have seen a town where it works. That's Bridgeport on Highway 395 in the Eastern Sierras. They have big signs that says back and angle parking only because 2 reasons. One, there's light traffic flow. Traffic flow is going 60 or 70 miles an hour, so you really need to be able to, you're going to pull out. It's really helpful to really be able to have good sight lines. That's not the case here, thank God. So I support 4. I think if you'd asked me 4 years ago, I would have supported 4. Some of the other options are, to me, are too confusing, and I think there is an advantage compared to the status quo of having that bright green stripe on the road. I think all drivers, whether they live in town or are from out of town, understand that means. That's my thoughts.
Can you speak about option 2? I don't think you mentioned that one.
But, I don't know. I have concerns about switching back and forth between 1-lane and 2-lane streets. I think that adds another layer of confusion. I don't see what we really get from it.
I don't think that's the case with, I think with option 2, it's all two-way. I see option 2 as being more like Channing Way in Berkeley, except not as wide.
Well, why not just make Kains 2 ways and be done with it?
Yeah, that's basically what option 2 is, except that then you put in intersection treatments to prevent it from being used as a through street.
I have some concerns about obstructing east-west traffic because it will just piss people off. And then if they're angry and confused and trying to get back on in the direction they're going, I think that would encourage accidents.
Can you explain that a little more?
Well, me personally, I mean, I don't drive on Kains, but I think if you introduce this change, people suddenly can't make turns to the side streets. I think it's frustrating and confusing. I think frustration and confusion leads to accidents.
I mean, you would just put in 1 at Washington, and then that, and then.
You know, if you need to slow traffic down, you can do option 4, but we're also talking about, you know, traffic calming at the intersections with option 4.
Yeah.
So I don't see what the real advantage. We can do, you know, traffic circles or whatever. The fire department, for what it's worth, you know, prefers one-way streets. They especially prefer being one-way on Adams because they need to pull out and go up the street. Same with the police department. But, you know, there is a reason these streets are one-way, were installed as being one-way streets. According to Clay Larson, it was in the 1950s. It's even more pertinent with ways is that if you can travel in the same direction as you're going on San Pablo Avenue just by diverting over, then that leads to cut-through traffic in the same direction as traffic on San Pablo. And solving that problem, which was why we went to one-way streets on Kains and Adams many years ago. So
Don't the diverters in option 2 solve the same problem in a different way?
Yeah, I'd rather have people who don't need to be on Kains and Adams to stay on San Pablo.
And I would like that too, but that's what we're trying to achieve.
So what are the options here? I mean, there's a sort of a mild consensus for 4, or continue to, work on some version of option 2. And, I just feel like I've been watching this project evolve for 7 years. Option 4 is a reasonable option. As you yourself said, I'm not sure option 2 is going to work. So I think it's kind of time to get done with this process myself. Granted, you guys weren't on council, so you didn't sit through 4 years of, discussing this project there. But the advantages to me is 4 is it allows two-way traffic for cycles. It's the most intuitive and consistent with the way drivers already use the street. And to me, it's the simplest option. I like simplicity.
I'll take a different point of view, which is I think option 2 is simpler than option 4. I think option 4 is something that hasn't been seen in the Bay Area anywhere else. And, we had to go across the Rocky Mountains to find an example of it being used somewhere. I think it may be familiar in the sense that people who've lived there a long time think of those as being one-way streets, and now they can continue using them that way and using them as through streets in the direction that's available. But option 2 makes them more like any other street. And yeah, there are some turn restrictions, so if you try to use it as a through street, you will be thwarted, and you'll realize it wasn't a good idea. Next time you won't try that.
To correct the record, there are options more locally than Chicago. There's one on Pacific Avenue in Santa Cruz, for example. This Pacific Avenue.
Okay. Sorry to be hyperbolic there. I think option 2 has the advantage of eliminating through traffic more effectively than any of the other options. There's a disadvantage that we don't know if it's workable.
May become more workable with the daylighting work. That will effectively widen the road, right?
Yeah, when I ask if it's workable, I mean whether it will create so many constraints that people can't drive where they need to drive to easily.
Well, that's, we have avoided in Albany historically the kind of traffic diversions that Berkeley has, precisely for that reason. There have been times when I've been driving around campus in Berkeley with all those traffic diverters, and I'm like being in a maze at some point. You figure out how to get to the place you want to go. I would never be in favor of that kind of traffic diversions. I guess the issue is, I personally don't feel we need to experiment anymore. First experiment, total flop. I mean, basically our citizens said, no, we're not doing it. So I'm skeptical that we need to be doing any more experimentation at this.
Any of these things would be an experiment except stay the way it is, right?
I think option 4 is the least experimental, most consistent with what people expect and what they are doing.
As you know, I totally disagree with that perspective, but even if I agree with your goal to do something that's familiar and not experimental, I think option 4 is unfamiliar and is experimental, and I'm curious to see solve any of the problems. I don't think it's a bad option. So
have any thoughts?
I've been divided for a little while, but I think I'm leaning towards option 2.
I can't hear. Can you speak?
Can you turn?
I drive on Kains and I bike on Kains every day, pretty much. And the through traffic has been a lot. There is a lot of through traffic going through Kains, more so than some of the other streets there. So I think option 2 would do a very good job of diverting that if it works.
What's the plan here? I mean, I'm happy to vote for 4 tonight. I'm not going to vote for 2.
I don't think I'm going to vote for any single option. I mean, if I had to make my own recommendation, it would be to ask the city council to proceed with option 1. And if they cannot do that, then use their best judgment to choose between 2 and 4. That's where I'm landing.
We could just decline to have it. Suggestion. We can't reach some kind of consensus.
I think you've put your preference on the table, which is just to vote for option 4. My preference on the table. Do you want to?
I guess I would be comfortable voting for 4. I'd be comfortable voting for 1. I would rather see something like 4 with treatments that block at least at one intersection that blocks through traffic.
Well, Kains at Marin is going to be blocked anyway, right?
Yeah.
The diverter treatment that we've been asking about, that's planned for Kains and Marin.
That is part of the current design that Alameda CTC is developing.
Personally, I would love to see 1 or 4 with a bulb out across, like not across Kains and Adams, but across the cross streets with either a table or, a median refuge or something, but like something to narrow it, moving the stop signs to Kains, just to make crossing confidence a lot higher. Because it's scary sometimes when, someone tears off of San Pablo and just like accelerates hard up the street. People come unpredictably quickly down the hill.
You're talking about east-west?
Yeah, east-west traffic. So I'd like to see north-south bulb outs, but not east-west bulb outs. And, four-way stops at all of the intersections, ideally. Whether we go with 1 in that configuration or 4 in that configuration with a couple of through traffic blockers, I'm willing to go either way. I guess I just don't have any super strong feelings between those 2 options. I think 4 is perfectly workable. I think 1 is perfectly workable. It's hard to move forward confidently with 2. It changes everyone's expectations. It defeats the older setup of the road to keep people from diverting off. But I guess when you have a diverter at every block, then it doesn't matter. I don't know. It's hard to quantify the trade-offs here, I guess.
I think if there was a commitment to have a diverter at every block, then, or at most blocks, then I guess I become a little more neutral between 2 and 4.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you don't even need them at every block. I feel like you maybe need 1 at Marin, 1 between Marin and Gilman, and 1 between Solano and Bryant.
What about just having?
Brighton, not we keep misspeaking about Brighton.
What about roundabouts and stop signs.
I mean, the roundabout, like Harry said, that, or Commissioner Comsey said, I think that the roundabouts will slow people down, but will they keep people from using it as a rush hour bypass? I don't know.
Well, it's, I mean, if you're using it as a rush hour bypass, for example, Kains, you can get onto Kains, the bank just south of El Cerrito Plaza. But the heavy traffic is going to be in the opposite direction, northbound, you know, if during Kains. Traffic on San Pablo is going to be northbound. So
Can we bring up the traffic count numbers again? Were those split out northbound, southbound, or were they just total volumes?
I think for the vehicle volumes, I just provided total volume.
Okay, well, I guess if it's just total volume, we can't answer that question.
total volume on Kains. Huh? Total volume on Kains.
Yeah, and
Actually, they're the predominant direction. I can pull it up.
I mean, even so, I guess it's a lot, though, right? Like that was like 1,200 cars a day or something.
That's the wrong side.
Bunch. Right, so
this was counts done at Solano and Kains. It's showing 1,200 vehicles exiting the intersection southbound. And Adams northbound exiting the intersection, 830 vehicles.
excuse me.
Request a couple of things. One is a time check. I think
Oh,
we need to extend the meeting, but also I would really like a 5-minute break if that's okay with you.
Oh, sure.
I'm sorry, but
Yeah.
I know it's only me sitting here, only one person, but I can't hear you when you don't talk into the
I'm sorry. I was only talking about meeting logistics.
I didn't know that. 'Cause I
Okay.
Um,
The request was for a short break and for an extension because we're about to go over time. Do we have a?
Was that a motion?
We need a motion to
Yeah.
extend the time to 10:30.
I'll move to extend the time to 10:30.
Second.
Well. All right. And let's recess for a few minutes. So. Excuse me. Okay, so do we feel like there's no way to go forward, or that is there a particular amendment for perhaps about the crossing treatments that would make you feel more comfortable with going with 4 for now?
Maybe. I mean, I don't want to be in the position of ruling out option 1 with deprioritized enforcement, because that seems like a simple, no-cost solution, but I know that City Council may reject that. So, again, my preference would be recommend option 1 with deprioritized enforcement, and then have a fallback or when, if or when council decides against that.
And there's no way to just make it 1-way for cars and 2-way for bikes and have no counterflow lane? Without the lane, though.
I think we asked that and it was not legal.
Okay.
Basically, to have the streets be the way they always were, with some bicyclists choosing to use it in the contraflow direction, but make that be legal. I think we were unable to allow that. Like, we're unable to allow contraflow parking. It's
Yeah, in the travel lane, bicycles have to follow the rules of the road.
Did the city attorney ever weigh in on the current situation where we have so many cars essentially parked illegally? Because technically the police should be ticketing all those cars, but they have refrained from doing that for obvious reasons.
I don't know if the city attorney, I mean, to speak to the question why we are not recommending the option 1 is that we have been unsuccessful in trying to do the component of it of pursuing state legislation to legalize the parking configuration. So it continues to be a scenario where most of the parking behavior is against the California Vehicle Code. And so that's why we're making options that, like option 4, that essentially has the same vehicle and bicycle movements, but it does restrict what's now allowed to egress the other way, but does it in a way that is compliant with the vehicle code.
In your staff recommendation, it says, in the staff recommendation, point 1, it says, and additional intersection treatments to facilitate safer crossings. That's your recommendation. Could the concerns expressed here be embraced by that language?
Yeah, so we would recommend any of these options to also proceed with looking at intersection improvements to make it safer to cross. I think the specific conversation you're having around diverting through traffic with 2-way vehicle traffic on the roads, you have less of an impact on local access. If you do option 4, where it's back to 1-way street, but then also limit it to right in, right out, you're going to have a greater impact on motor vehicle access to each block, because essentially you're only going to be able to get in from one direction of a cross street onto a particular block. Whereas with making them fully 2-way with the right in, right out restriction, you have 2 ingress, 2 egress options for each block. So if you proceeded with option 4, we would still be looking at intersection treatments, but we might be less inclined to do a lot of right in, right out restrictions in conjunction with that, because you're then going to have greater impacts. That's what we would have to look at more closely.
I know, for example, there's lots of residential streets in Berkeley and some up in the hills too, not Kensington, that have traffic circles. People just have to go around them.
Yeah, so they're one of the other intersection treatments we would look at. They would make it slower, slow the cross traffic, so improve the safety of crossing, but would have less of an impact on the multi-block cut-through traffic.
Personally, I'm much more concerned about the multi-block traffic at the moment. I think I think the issue of safety crossing can be addressed by changing stop signs or changing traffic. There will be some way to do that that doesn't change traffic pattern. What requires a change to the traffic pattern is preventing the through movements.
Well, the only other piece I can add, and maybe it's useful, is that during the October discussion, the other component of this that we didn't really hear a lot of today was that the one-way vehicle traffic had a feeling of safety to it associated for the cyclists. We were hearing more of from in October, where you only had vehicles coming in one direction predominantly, and that felt safer than when we had proposed the two-way with diversion option. So we didn't hear a lot about that concern tonight, but that did come up from several comments in October was the other piece that came up in our earlier discussion.
So is the concern about through traffic, is the concern about through traffic for bikes or for vehicles? We're not changing the way it's been for vehicles since, it's been this way for 50 years. So there's a level of through traffic.
I don't understand the question. Yeah.
So it's been a concern voiced by residents in the earlier study, and we've heard in our survey more. It still is a concern. We don't have the cut-through traffic in the direction of San Pablo, but there still is a level of use of the streets for multi-block travel as an alternative for other travel behavior than pulling off San Pablo with a right turn and then going on the next block. So there's the reducing the volume of vehicles as one potential bicycle safety direction. There's the limiting to vehicles only being traveling in one direction as the bicycle safety and more predictability, less conflict points. Those two options are addressing one of those considerations more than the other.
Is anybody else who's present tonight inclined, as I am, to ask the council to consider option 1 seriously? Or if that's just me, then I'll drop it.
Let's see. I'm reasonably well inclined towards 1. I think 1 is a fine option, assuming that the improved signage does in fact make people not yell at people at counterflow cars. We don't know that, and we can't know that until it's completed. But I don't know.
Option 1 does say to pursue legislation to allow left-wheel-to-curb parking. So do you want to abandon?
I guess I am confused by why it's okay in Berkeley and not okay here. Has Berkeley just decided to ignore state law? Or do they have, they can't override it locally, can they?
I think they've been in place for a long time, so it's not a recent decision. There are a couple of short block sort of made dead ends as part of their broader diversion of local, cut through traffic. So I don't think it's same sort of corridor, multi-block treatment that we have here. But I don't know the history of when they decided to do that and why they were okay with it.
I don't think Berkeley has ever made a formal statement about it, as far as I know. They've just
did it.
chosen to ignore it because it's never caused any problems. A lot of people are wondering why we haven't, why we're not open to that approach here. And I really don't think we can come to an answer to that at this meeting for whatever reason.
Yeah.
So,
Well, one of the things you give up between 1 and 4 is you don't let people go 2 ways within the block on Kains like they can do now, although apparently that's seldom done. That's what we've.
For motor vehicles, yeah.
Yeah, it seemed
We found it
like 2% of trips or less.
I don't think we're giving up much in that regard between 1 and 4. My concern with, I don't know, is 2 still an option? I'm just concerned that we could do endless experiments on these streets and be doing it for 20 or 30 years, trying new things every 5 years. And I think at some point we need to make it's been 7 years. At some point, we should make a decision and stick to it. For the sake of the citizens who want some surety about how they're supposed to drive on the roads.
I don't see why 4 is better than 2 in that regard, either way. The difference is that with 4, I think we understand what the design would be. With 2, there's some design work needed. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, that's part of it. But also, I think 4 is just more consistent with how people have been using the streets for years. And I think it's also more intuitive for people who haven't been using the streets for years. I mean, it sure as heck looks like a one-way street. And that's how people, for the most part, are treating it, regardless of what they're allowed to do.
I'll agree with one part of what you just said and strongly disagree with the other. I think option 4 does match the way people have been using the street for decades. And if we think that, given the character of Albany residents, that's the best thing to do, that people can't change their ways in this town, maybe that's true, and maybe we go with that for that reason. But for new people, I think option 2 is easier to understand. Option 2 is just like any other street. It's just that there's some turn movements prohibited.
Yeah, I mean, it's
You
no.
see the sign and you see the diverter, and you're like, oh, I can't turn I can't go straight here. I have to turn right. Everybody knows.
Kains is no wider or narrower than any of the other streets in that area, is it?
That's correct.
Okay.
So it would be just like any other street in Albany, except that there would be some diverters, which I think when you get to the diverter, you know what to do. It may annoy you, and it may take you a while to figure out what you should have done differently 5 minutes earlier so that you wouldn't have gotten stuck there. That's what I'm concerned about. But knowing what to do when you see it, I think it's as simple as can be. And it leads to cars moving slowly and a small number of cars and an opportunity for a really comfortable experience for riding a bike. I think 4 is a risk. I think the experience of being in that contraflow lane and sort of pushed up against parked cars who are moving in and out is something that we haven't tried. I mean, I haven't experienced it as a bike rider. I don't know whether it would seem scary or not. At least one avid bicyclist in the public comments said that he would not be comfortable using the street anymore if it was set up like that. I don't know if that's realistic or not. I think option 4 has its own risks. It really bothers me to be making this decision in a commission that doesn't have two of our most knowledgeable.
Ultimately, it's the council that makes the decision. The question here is, what are we recommending to the council?
And so for the grant, we just need a direction and to start on a plan so that we can have it far enough along that it is compelling by June.
So if our direction is to pursue option 2 or 4, that's not specific enough for the grant proposal?
We'd have to figure that out. I think having a clear idea of what we want to install, even if we don't have a full design, would be more competitive.
What's the possibility in terms of timing of the grant funding of just throwing this into council's lap and say, you decide?
Well, so if you aren't ready to make a decision tonight, if we waited till May's commission meeting, we would be able to bring it to council, but we would have very little time to
write the grant.
To adjust to council direction. We would have to make assumptions on what the proposal is to have it ready in time. We could bring it, you could recommend we bring it to council, but without design direction from you, so that we give them a chance to give us direction without your recommendation.
So if our recommendation was as broad as saying we recommend the council consider options 1, 2, and 4, and council would have to get their hands dirty and figure it out.
That would put it to council to make a decision or to kick it back. I mean, we could not pursue this grant and figure out future funding and have to take longer to do it.
I
if
mean,
we
the
need
council
more time.
could take our vague recommendation and say, well, we can't nail it down in the time remaining, so let's just not do this grant.
Is there a problem with recommending in a grant application the development of a model that violates, DMV code? I think that would be a problem.
Anyone suggesting that?
That's what option 1 is.
Option 1 doesn't violate the DMV code, it's the driver's behavior that violates the DMV code.
Well, that's...
And option 1 is on the ground now, there's no...
Right,
no prohibition against building it. And there's no prohibition against continuing to improve it.
That includes ticketing everybody who parks in the wrong direction.
No, nowhere does it say that all those people have to be given tickets. Maybe there's some other language somewhere that hasn't been revealed to us that is forcing the city to start giving all those people tickets, but nothing that I've seen.
It doesn't solve the problem that would be going forward with a grant that is not consistent with state vehicle code.
It would be continuing a design where people continue to not comply with the vehicle code, or we would be needing to ramp up enforcement and make people figure out how to turn around on these streets to park with the right wheels to the curb.
And I want city council to make that decision. I don't want to be in the position of making that decision because I feel like I don't really have all the information needed to make a good decision. So if the choices are that we send a vague recommendation to city council tonight and let them do what they will, which may be nothing, or we postpone and discuss it at the commission next month, which of those gives us a better chance of being able to get this grant, or are they both pretty hopeless?
Is there a possibility of moving, I'm sorry, is there a possibility of moving our meeting earlier next month in order to get the whole group's input before city council meeting next month?
We could explore setting up a special meeting.
Or a special meeting?
It wouldn't give us a lot of time if there's more information you're desiring to inform that discussion, but if it's just to see if we could get additional commissioner
I don't think we
input on
need anything from staff. We haven't, I mean, the only thing I would ask for as far as additional information is, let's make a tentative design for option 2, but that's way out of scope for thing to do this month, so not, I don't think there's anything. If we were to come back as a commission to visit this again, I think it could be with the same materials. More commissioners. But scheduling it could be a nightmare, and I'm going to be away for a lot of the middle part of May, so I might not be there. But that's okay, I've had my say, and you guys heard it, so.
Well, let me ask this question. Why does staff prefer 4 over 2? Because we're going to have to, if we do this again, even if we have a special meeting, there'll be 2 commissioners here who haven't heard this conversation unless they go watch it, but then we'll have to sort of do this all over again.
I think staff prefers option 4 over option 2 because it provides more flexibility at the intersections. So in the same way that option 5, we haven't studied the parking loss or gain, we haven't studied the flow of traffic with option 2. So option 2 could create some difficulties for traffic to get to certain segments of Kains and Adams Street if we force right turns at every intersection. Option 4 provides more flexibility from intersection to intersection to get both vehicles and bicycles and pedestrians through safely.
All right, we're going to need to extend time again, or do you think we can come to a decision in the next 5 minutes?
Well, you know, I still prefer the staff option. I prefer moving ahead. Sometimes, if you're going to recommend something to council, it's just useful to recommend something firm so that they can either like, you know, disagree or agree, but, you know, there's something there for them to work from. But we don't have, I suppose we could, you know, not come to any recommendation at all. Then why are we here as a commission if we just shrug our shoulders and say, oh, let's.
Well, I mean, it's hard. It's hard because we don't have.
We aren't really here as a commission.
Yeah,
That's the problem.
We're very short tonight, so. I don't know. I'm comfortable voting for 4. I don't. It seems like 1 has been ruled out by the council, or as just like too uncertain.
Don't really know.
Yeah, we don't know. 2 also seems fine, but it, like you said, like, what if we can't put those there? What if people hate having to go onto San Pablo whenever they're going, you know, whenever they mess up their right turn going south? Or, you know, they go past their destination. If they go all the way up out of San Pablo, it's much different than going around on Stanage.
Can we make a tentative recommendation, but also try to schedule an additional meeting? And then if we fail to achieve an additional meeting, then that recommendation goes, our tentative recommendation goes to council.
Remember, there's no point in having an additional meeting unless the other commissioners are going to
Right.
be available.
Right.
We're rolling the dice a little on that, given it's
Yeah,
summertime.
That's why I'm asking if it's possible to have a recommendation that's to be used as a fallback if it's not possible to schedule a special meeting.
I don't know of an issue with that.
Can you say that again?
I don't know of any issue with making a recommendation, but also directing us to pursue scheduling a
So another way to put it is
special meeting
we're making a recommendation, but we're asking to postpone sending it to council until we make an attempt to schedule a follow-up meeting.
Oh, a quick question. What is going to be presented to council? Are they going to be presented these same 5 options? But with the comment that Transportation Commission suggested number 4? Or are they going to, you're going to winnow it down further?
Generally, they get a similar discussion to what you're presented with. We would probably do a shorter presentation, but they would get most of the discussion in the staff report.
I'm sure, if Ken or Fareed have strong objections, they can talk to at least somebody on the council directly, at least one person.
I mean, I will.
It's not like we've completely eliminated their ability to influence the council's decision.
I will say there isn't a ton of time before we would need materials for council. It would have to be the first couple weeks of May, which is the second part of next week or the week after. So there's scheduling would be tight.
I mean, they always have the option, the commissioners who are not here, of going to city council and making public comment if they disagree with what we come up with. Of course, it's limited in terms of the time and the amount of input that they're going to have,
But under the Brown Act, they can talk to a council member. No, one, you can correct me if that's not your impression. Basically, given that we have 5 members on historically we had 5 members on this commission and the council. 2 people can confer with each other, but no more than 2.
We do need to extend again, I'm afraid. I'll move to extend to 10:45.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Seems unanimous. So do you want to go with the tentative 4, but let's try to meet with everybody, or do you think that that's too unlikely?
Seems unlikely. What about, I'm trying to formulate a motion. All right, I'm making a motion. See if I can do it. I move to recommend option 4 for the purposes of the grant application, but to give serious consideration to other options due to the Commission's uncertainty.
And out of respect for absent members.
And out of respect for absent members. And if folks are open, I would even amend that to say serious consideration to options 1 and 2. If folks are in agreement that 3 and 5 are not of much interest to us.
So if we can't pick something, we can at least eliminate some.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to eliminate at least 3. I don't think that anybody's going to take 5 particularly seriously.
We might as well let them not bother looking at it. Okay, so have I made a motion that's clear enough? I try to state it again.
We've got it.
Got it? Do we have a second for
Can you
that?
read it back? I'm sorry.
Now you're putting me on the spot. So move to recommend option 4 with serious consideration to options 1 and 2, given the commission's uncertainty and absent member, out of respect for absent members.
So if that's the motion, that's your motion.
My motion, it
I'll
doesn't.
second that. Okay.
Roll call?
Commissioner Barnes?
Yes.
Commissioner Chomsky?
Yes.
Commissioner Von Neiningen?
Yes.
Chair Vihil McClanahan?
Yeah.
Motion carries.
All right. Do we have any announcements?
Let me pull them up. Hold on. There we go. Mainly announcements of work that's going on. We've got striping refresh in southeastern portion of the city, including intersection red curb that was installed on along Dartmouth Street recently. Slurry seal project, you probably noticed, is underway on various streets. We have San Pablo pedestrian improvements underway on intersections north of Washington, and there's also been plenty of East Bay mud pipeline replacement work you may have noticed along San Pablo Avenue. And reiterating AC Transit Realign timeline, they have a May 23rd, 6 p.m. virtual workshop, and June 5th special board meeting to discuss their service planning. Those are my announcements.
All right. Does anyone have any future agenda items that they'd like to bring up or like to request?
Do you want to request the issue of too many cars parking near the park?
Yeah, so I don't know if it, like, asking for a parking study is within our remit. I don't know how much, like, we affect parking, but is parking part of our sort of...
Parking management.
Yeah, the commission has discussed parking management in the past.
I mean, there certainly were a number of complaints about parking at the park. I don't want to let them go unheard. I don't know what even serious study of the matter would do. There's not really, like, it's a fully built up area. There's no room for an infill parking structure that isn't going to cost $1 skrillion because you're going to have to dig it under the park.
And also, there are a lot of neighborhoods of Albany where people have complained that it's too hard to park, and I don't know if this Terrace Park stands out as being different from complaint that we've heard again and again.
Sorry, can you clarify which park?
This is Jules Terrace Park is the one by the red curbing that we were discussing in item 5.1. There's basically no parking there. And it's not super well served by public transit. I guess you could improve wayfinding for people parking west of the park and walking up, but
I think the real question is, do we want to agendize it more urgently than other places in town where people have said that they have a hard time parking?
yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm not really the person to ask about the importance of parking, I guess.
I think parking is important. I just don't know if this one location actually stands out or if it's just the one that we happen to hear about tonight.
Yeah, I wanted to spend just like a few minutes more on it because I know that some people are concerned that it's so difficult, but I don't see where the scope is to have any positive effect on that particular area, because there's, it's relatively easy to access from the major through streets around it. It's not hard to get to from Nielsen. And I forget what the uphill street is.
Peralta?
Oh, Peralta, yeah. So, I don't know. I don't want them to feel ignored, but also I don't know what we can do, either as a council or as a city.
Welcome to being the chair of the transportation.
All right, well, if no one has anything else, then I suppose we can adjourn and see you all next Thursday. Or no, Thursday, May 23rd, not next Thursday.